The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a canvas of burnt orange and shadow, where nothing moved except heat shimmer and the occasional dust devil spiraling into oblivion. Ethan Rourke had learned to read this land the way other men read newspapers. Every rock, every dried creek bed, every shift in the wind told a story. Today, the story whispered danger. His horse, a gray gelding named Ash, picked its way carefully through the scattered boulders at the base of the mesa. 3 days out from Copper Springs with nothing to show for it but an empty canteen and the bitter taste of failed prospects. The played-out claim he'd been chasing turned out to be exactly that, played out. Another fool's hope buried in Arizona Territory dirt. Ethan pulled his hat lower against the afternoon sun, squinting at the landscape ahead. At 34, his face already carried the weathered map of hard years. The war, the campaigns, the long rides between nowhere and nothing. His dark hair, longer than regulation ever allowed, curled at his collar. His eyes, pale blue against sun-darkened skin, had seen too much to trust easy promises anymore. The war had ended 7 years ago, but out here nobody seemed to have gotten the message. Union, Confederate, those labels meant nothing in the territories. The real divide ran deeper, older, and far more bitter. Settlers pushing west met Apache defending homeland, and the resulting friction burned hotter than any forge. Ethan had served as a scout during the war, then stayed on afterward, guiding cavalry patrols through Apache country. He'd been good at it, too good. He knew the land, knew the patterns, knew how to think like the warriors he tracked. But knowledge came with a price, and his was measured in the faces of the dead he couldn't forget. 2 years ago, he'd turned in his scout's badge and walked away, bought a pickaxe and a pan, chased gold rumors from one empty hole to the next. It wasn't much of a life, but it was his. No orders, no blood, no choosing which side of the divide to stand on. Ash's ears flicked forward, and Ethan's hand dropped instinctively to the Winchester rifle in its saddle scabbard. The horse had better instincts than most men he'd known. Whatever had caught its attention wasn't random. "Easy," Ethan murmured, scanning the rocky terrain ahead. Then he saw it, a flash of color that didn't belong. Dark fabric against pale stone, 50 yards ahead in a cluster of boulders. Ethan dismounted silently, leaving Ash ground-tied. He pulled the Winchester free and moved forward on foot, using the rocks for cover. Every instinct screamed ambush, but something felt wrong about that too. The placement was too obvious, too careless. As he closed the distance, the shape resolved into human form. A person, small-framed, slumped against the base of a boulder. Dark hair falling across a face Ethan couldn't yet see. Blood on the rocks. He circled wide, rifle ready, checking angles. No movement. No sound except wind hissing through stone channels. Finally, he approached directly, weapon trained on the figure. It was a boy. Apache, maybe 15 or 16, wearing traditional clothing now stained dark with blood. A nasty wound in his side leaked steadily despite the crude bandaging. His face, pale beneath bronze skin, carried the slack expression of someone dancing with death. Ethan lowered the rifle slightly, scanning the surroundings again. No tracks leading away, no sign of ambush. Just one bleeding kid in the middle of nowhere. The smart move was clear. Keep riding. This wasn't his fight, wasn't his problem. Getting involved with Apache business, especially an injured warrior, could mean anything from simple murder to igniting a full-scale incident. The boy's eyes fluttered open. Dark, fever-bright, they fixed on Ethan with surprising focus. No fear there, just recognition of what was coming. "Go ahead," the boy whispered in accented but clear English. "Finish it." Ethan stood frozen, the rifle suddenly heavy in his hands. He'd killed men before, Apache warriors among them, but always in combat, always in the heat of survival. Never like this. Never execution. The boy coughed, and blood flecked his lips. "Waiting makes it harder," he said. "Trust me." "What happened to you?" Ethan heard himself ask. "Does it matter?" The boy's laugh turned into another cough. "You people shoot us either way." "I'm not going to shoot you." "Then you're a fool." The boy's eyes drifted closed again. "They'll come looking. Find you with me. Kill you slow for the favor." Ethan should have listened. should have mounted up and put distance between himself and this dying kid. Instead, he found himself kneeling beside him, examining the wound. Knife work, deep but clean. The bleeding had slowed, but infection would set in soon without proper care. "Your people do this?" Ethan asked. The boy's eyes opened again, studying him with unsettling intelligence. "Why do you care?" "Call it curiosity." "Curiosity killed the scout." Ethan's hand stilled. "How did you know?" "I've seen you before, Copper Springs, 6 months ago. You were with the soldiers, but you didn't wear their uniform. Watched you argue with their captain about something. You lost." The boy managed a weak smile. "We watch everything." Memory stirred. A patrol into disputed territory, Colonel Vance wanting to push through sacred ground, Ethan arguing for a different route. Vance had pulled rank, and 3 men had died in the resulting ambush. "That wasn't your people," Ethan said. "That was Chiricahua." "All Apache looked the same to white men." "Not to me." Ethan pulled his canteen and offered it. "Drink." The boy hesitated, then accepted. Water dribbled down his chin as he drank. "You're still a fool. Helping me changes nothing." "Maybe, but I'm not killing a kid for bleeding in the wrong place." "I'm not a kid. I'm a warrior." "Sure you are." Ethan began unpacking his saddlebag. "And I'm the president. Now shut up and let me work." The boy watched in silence as Ethan cleaned and redressed the wound with strips torn from a spare shirt. The kid was tough. Barely flinched even when Ethan poured whiskey over the gash to clean it. "What's your name?" Ethan asked as he worked. A long pause. "Tala." "Tala. That means something, doesn't it?" "Wolf?" "Fitting." Ethan tied off the bandage. "I'm Ethan." "I know. The soldiers called you Rourke. You've got good ears." "I'm Apache. We hear everything." Tala shifted, testing the bandage. "This is a mistake. For both of us." "Probably." Ethan stood, brushing dust from his knees. "Can you ride?" "I can do whatever I need to do." "That's not what I asked." Tala tried to stand, made it halfway before his legs gave out. Ethan caught him before he hit the ground. The boy was burning up, fever already setting in despite the fresh bandaging. "Stubborn won't keep you alive," Ethan said. "There's a line shack about 10 miles north. Old prospector's place, been abandoned for years. We can hole up there until you're stronger." "We?" Tala's eyes searched his face. "Why?" It was a good question. Ethan didn't have a good answer. Maybe it was exhaustion from running. Maybe it was guilt over all the blood already spilled. Maybe it was just the simple, stupid fact that he was tired of watching people die. "Because I'm a fool," he said finally. "You said it yourself." Getting Tala onto the horse proved harder than treating the wound. The boy's pride fought accepting help, but his body had different ideas. By the time Ethan got him settled in the saddle, Tala had passed out again. The ride north took 4 hours. Ethan walked, leading Ash carefully through the increasingly rocky terrain. The sun crawled toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and crimson. Beautiful country, if you ignored everything trying to kill you. The line shack appeared as the last light faded, a sorry-looking structure of weathered wood and hope, leaning slightly to one side but still standing. Ethan had used it before, knew it had a good spring nearby and enough walls to provide shelter. He got Tala inside and settled on the one piece of furniture that hadn't rotted through, an old cot with a surprisingly intact mattress. The boy's fever had worsened. He muttered in Apache, words Ethan couldn't understand but recognized as delirium. Ethan built a small fire, heated water from the spring, and spent the next hour forcing liquid down Tala's throat and keeping the fever from cooking his brain. It was going to be a long night. Around midnight, Tala's eyes opened, clearer than before. "You're still here." "Where else would I be?" "Smart men would have left hours ago." "Never claimed to be smart." Ethan offered more water. "How do you feel?" "Like someone stuck a knife in me." Tala drank, then studied Ethan in the firelight. "Why did they do it? Your people, I mean. Why keep pushing into our lands?" "Same reason your people raid settlements. Survival, resources, fear." "We were here first." "I know." "Then why help them?" Ethan stared into the fire, watching embers spiral upward. I didn't, always. During the war, I was just trying to stay alive. After, I thought maybe I could help both sides understand each other, build some kind of bridge. He laughed bitterly. That worked out well. What changed? I watched a colonel order his men to burn a village, women and children inside. When I objected, he called it military necessity. Ethan's jaw tightened at the memory. I put my badge on his desk that night and walked away. Tala was quiet for a long moment. Your colonel sounds like our war chiefs, always talking about honor and necessity while children burn. Yeah. Ethan met the boy's eyes. Guess some things cross the divide. Not many white men would admit that. I'm not most white men. Clearly. Tala shifted on the cot, wincing. My people will be looking for me. When they find out what happened. What did happen? Another pause, longer this time. When Tala spoke, his voice carried weight beyond his years. There's going to be a war. Bigger than the raids, bigger than the patrols. My uncle, Chief Kyle, he's been holding the young warriors back, but they're restless. The settlers keep pushing, taking more land, killing more game. Last week, a patrol attacked a hunting party, killed 3 of our best men. I heard about that. Colonel Vance claimed they fired first. They didn't. They were tracking deer, not soldiers. Tala's eyes hardened. The young warriors wanted revenge, immediate, bloody revenge. Kyle refused, said we needed to be smart, not emotional. Some of the warriors disagreed strongly. Understanding dawned. The wound. Your own people did this. A warrior named Neshoba. He said I was too sympathetic to whites, that I'd been corrupted by learning their language, their ways. He wanted to make an example. Tala touched the bandage gingerly. Kyle stopped him before he could finish the job, but the damage was done. Neshoba and his followers left camp, swearing to start the war Kyle won't allow. Jesus. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. How many warriors with Neshoba? Maybe 20? Enough to cause serious problems. And enough to get a lot of people killed. Ethan stood, pacing the small shack. Does Kyle know where they went? If he does, he hasn't shared it. But Neshoba isn't subtle. He'll hit something big, something that forces everyone to choose sides. Tala tried to sit up, failed. That's why you need to leave me here and ride for Copper Springs. Warn your people. Maybe they can prepare, maybe prevent. If I warn them, Colonel Vance will use it as an excuse to launch that full-scale campaign he's been wanting. He doesn't do prevention. He does overwhelming force. Then we're all dead anyway. Maybe not. Ethan stopped pacing, an idea forming. What if someone talked to Kyle? Someone who knows both sides, who might be able to convince him to act before Neshoba does. Who? You? Tala laughed, then coughed. They'd kill you the moment you entered our territory. If not for being white, then for being a scout who's hunted Apache before. You could vouch for me. I'm apparently corrupted by white sympathies, remember? My word carries less weight than it did a week ago. But Kyle's your uncle. He'd listen to you. About some things. About inviting a white scout into our camp. Tala shook his head. That's different. Ethan crouched beside the cot, meeting Tala's eyes. Listen to me. If Neshoba attacks and Vance retaliates, there won't be any going back. It'll be total war, and your people will lose. Not because they aren't good fighters. They're the best I've ever seen. But because the army has numbers, supplies, and no mercy left. They'll wipe out every Apache in the territory. You sound very certain. I've seen it before. After the war, in Kansas, with the Cheyenne. The pattern's always the same. A few hothead warriors start something, the cavalry overreacts, and by the end, there's nothing left but graves and broken treaties. Tala studied him for a long moment. You really think you could stop it? I think I have to try. Why? These aren't your people. Either side. Ethan thought about that. About Ayla. Though he didn't know her name yet, the woman he'd glimpsed once during a failed peace talk, standing beside Kyle with eyes that saw right through the military's lies. About the settlers' children he'd seen playing in Copper Springs, innocent of their parents' sins. About all the blood that would soak into this desert if someone didn't find another way. Because maybe they could be, he said finally. Both of them. Tala closed his eyes. You're definitely a fool. So you've said, but am I a fool you'll help? Silence stretched between them. Outside, a coyote called to the moon, its cry lonely in the darkness. The fire popped and settled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. If I do this, Tala said finally, if I take you to Kael, you have to understand something. He won't trust you. Most of the warriors won't trust you. And if anything goes wrong, they'll kill you in ways that make Neshoba's knife work look gentle. Understood. And even if Kael listens, even if he agrees to meet with your colonel, there's no guarantee it will work. Vance sounds like the kind of man who wants war, not peace. He is. But he answers to territorial command, and they answer to Washington. If I can get Kael to agree to terms, to show good faith, it might be enough to force Vance's hand. Might. It's better than definitely watching everyone die. Tala opened his eyes again. You saved my life. That means something in our culture. I owe you a debt. He took a shaky breath. 2 days. Give me 2 days to get strong enough to travel, and I'll take you to Kael. After that, you're on your own. Ethan felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. It wasn't much. It wasn't even close to enough. But it was a start. 2 days, he agreed. Rest now. I'll keep watch. Tala's eyes drifted closed. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep. Ethan added wood to the fire and settled against the wall, Winchester across his knees. The night passed slowly. Ethan dozed intermittently, jerking awake at every sound, wind against wood, the horse shifting outside, once a mountain lion's scream in the distance. Each time, Tala slept on, his body focused on the serious business of healing. Dawn came cold and clear, the desert morning crisp enough to see breath. Ethan checked Tala's wound. No fresh bleeding, no smell of infection yet. Good signs, but the boy still burned with fever. Ethan spent the day gathering firewood, hunting, and preparing what passed for medicine out here. Willow bark tea for the fever, poultices made from desert plants he'd learned about from an old Apache woman during his scouting days. She'd taught him in exchange for protection from drunk soldiers. He wondered if she was still alive, if she'd lived to see the peace she'd hoped for, or just more war. Tala woke periodically throughout the day, never for long. Each time, Ethan got water and willow bark tea into him, changed the bandage, checked for infection. The wound looked clean. The fever seemed to be breaking. By evening, Tala managed to sit up and keep down some broth Ethan had made from rabbit. He still looked like death warmed over, but death that had decided to stick around a while. Tell me about Kael, Ethan said as they ate. What kind of man is he? Tala considered the question. Smart, careful. He thinks 3 moves ahead, like a chess player. You know chess? A missionary taught me, before the soldiers burned his mission. Tala's expression didn't change. Kael learned to think that way from necessity. He watched our people broken by treaties that were never honored, promises that were always lies. So now he trusts actions, not words. What kind of actions? Proof. Demonstrated commitment. If you want him to believe peace is possible, you'll have to show him, not just say it. And if I can't, then you'll die. And probably so will I for bringing you. Tala set aside his bowl. That's why this is insane. We're betting everything on something that probably won't work. Got a better idea? Run, both of us. Head east, start over somewhere that isn't bleeding itself dry. Ethan shook his head. I've been running for 2 years. It doesn't help. The blood follows you. Maybe, but at least you're alive to feel guilty. Tala laid back down, exhaustion written in every line of his face. We leave in 2 days, if I'm strong enough. And if you're not, we leave anyway. Neshoba won't wait for my health to improve. The second day passed much like the first, watching, waiting, tending Tala's wound. The fever broke completely by evening. The boy still looked weak, but his eyes had cleared and he could stand without swaying. Good enough for desperate men. On the morning of the 3rd day, they rode out. Tala sat in front of Ethan on Ash, still too weak to ride alone. They moved slowly, careful of the wound, stopping frequently to rest. How far to Kael's camp? Ethan asked during one stop. In your miles? Maybe 20, but we won't go straight there. Tala pointed toward a distinctive rock formation to the northeast. First, we'll be intercepted by scouts. They'll surround us, weapons ready. You'll need to stay very still and let me talk. What will you tell them? The truth. That you saved my life. That you have information about Neshoba. That Kael should hear you before deciding to kill you. Comforting. It's the best I can offer. Tala looked back at him. Last chance to reconsider. Once we're in Apache territory, there's no turning back. Ethan thought about everything that had led him here. The war, the deaths, the slow erosion of hope. He thought about Vance and his itchy trigger finger, about Neshoba and his 20 warriors looking for an excuse, about all the people, both sides, who'd die if this thing exploded. Let's ride, he said. They crossed into what Ethan knew was Apache territory around noon. The landscape didn't change, same rocks, same scrub, same brutal sun. But the feeling shifted. Every shadow seemed deeper, every sound sharper. The sense of being watched became oppressive. They're close, Tala murmured. Keep your hands visible. Don't reach for any weapons. Ethan's palm itched to touch the Winchester, but he forced himself to keep both hands on the reins. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it, point of no return. The Apache warriors materialized like ghosts, one moment empty landscape, the next moment surrounded. 7 of them, all armed, all with expressions that promised violence. Ethan recognized the type, young, angry, hungry to prove themselves. The leader, a hard-faced man, maybe 30 years old, spoke rapid Apache to Tala. Ethan caught none of it, but the tone was clear enough, accusatory, hostile. Tala responded calmly, his voice steady despite his weakness. He gestured to Ethan once, to his own bandaged side twice. The exchange went on for several minutes, voices rising occasionally. Finally, the leader made a sharp gesture. 2 warriors moved forward, one yanking Ethan from the saddle, while the other relieved him of every weapon, rifle, pistol, knife, even a small blade in his boot. It's all right, Tala said in English. They're taking us to Kael. Just don't fight them. Ethan found himself marched forward at spear point, his hands bound behind his back. The warriors moved fast through terrain that seemed impassable, following paths only they could see. Tala rode, barely staying upright, but conscious. After an hour, they crested a rise and Ethan got his first view of the Apache camp. It sprawled across a hidden valley, protected by cliffs on 3 sides and positioned to see anyone approaching from miles away. Maybe 50 wickiups, traditional dome-shaped dwellings, scattered in a pattern that looked random but probably wasn't. Smoke from cooking fires rose in thin columns. Children played near the structures while women worked, their movements efficient and purposeful. And standing in the center of it all, watching their approach with an expression carved from stone, was Chief Kael. He was older than Ethan expected, maybe 50, with silver threading through his long dark hair. But there was nothing weak about him. He stood straight, his lean frame radiating authority, his eyes, dark and penetrating, taking in every detail. Beside him stood a woman, perhaps 25, with the same intense eyes and regal bearing. She wore traditional clothing, her hair bound back with a red cloth, and she carried herself like someone who'd never learned to back down from anything. Ethan would later learn her name was Ayla, Kael's daughter. In that moment, he only knew that when her eyes met his, something shifted in his chest. Recognition of a kind he couldn't name and didn't have time to examine. The warriors forced Ethan to his knees before Kael. Tala dismounted, swayed, and was caught by the woman, Ayla. She helped him stand, her expression shifting from anger to concern as she saw his condition. Kael spoke, his voice carrying across the gathering crowd. More Apache all this time. In English. Tala tells me you saved his life, that you brought him here, knowing what it might cost you, that you have information I need to hear. He paused, studying Ethan the way a hawk studies prey. Tell me why I shouldn't kill you where you kneel. You were a scout. You hunted my people. You led soldiers to our camps, our hunting grounds. You were part of the machine that kills us. Ethan met Kael's eyes, keeping his voice steady. I was. I did all those things, and I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I'm here because we're about to enter a war that will destroy your people, and I think there might be one chance, one very small chance, to stop it. Wars have been coming since the first white man crossed the Mississippi. Why is this one different? Because this time, a warrior named Neshoba is going to give Colonel Vance the excuse he's been waiting for. Vance doesn't want peace. He wants to make his reputation by wiping out every Apache in the territory, and Neshoba's about to hand him the justification. Murmurs rippled through the gathered Apache. Kyle expression didn't change, but Ethan saw his jaw tighten slightly. Neshoba is hot-headed but loyal. Neshoba stabbed your nephew and took 20 warriors to start the war you've been trying to prevent, Ethan said bluntly. Ask Tala if you don't believe me. All eyes turned to Tala. The boy straightened, meeting his uncle's gaze. It's true. Neshoba and his followers left 3 days ago. They plan to attack settlers, force a response, make peace impossible. The crowd erupted, warriors shouting, women calling questions, elders demanding answers. Kale raised one hand and silence fell immediately. That kind of authority couldn't be faked. And you, Kale turned back to Ethan, you think you can stop this? I think if we work together, maybe. If you and I can show both sides there's another way. Another way. Kale's laugh was bitter. How many other ways have we tried? How many treaties signed and broken? How many promises made and forgotten? I know, but no. Kale's voice cracked like a whip. You don't know. You weren't here when soldiers slaughtered women gathering water. You didn't watch children starve on reservation land that couldn't support a rabbit. You haven't spent decades watching your people ground down by 1,000 cuts while being told to accept peace. Ethan felt the truth of it like a physical blow. You're right, I don't know that. But I know what comes next if Neshoba succeeds. Total war. Vance with unlimited authority and unlimited soldiers. I've seen it before in Kansas. The Cheyenne fought hard, fought well. But in the end, there were just too many soldiers, too many guns, too much hate. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Your people are strong. They're smart. They're the best fighters in the territory. But they can't win a war of attrition against an entire army. So we should just surrender? No, I'm saying pick the battle you can win. Force Vance's hand before Neshoba does. Show the territorial command that you're willing to talk, that you can be reasonable. Make them choose between a chief offering peace and a colonel demanding war. Kale was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter but no less intense. And why should I trust you to broker this peace? Why should I believe you won't lead soldiers back here the moment I let you go? Because I'm not going back to Vance, Ethan said. I'm going back to Copper Springs to talk to people who might actually listen. Settlers who are tired of the violence. Merchants who want safe roads. Families who want their children to grow up. People who don't benefit from war. And if they won't listen, then I'll have tried. And you'll be in the same position you're in now, except you'll know for certain that peace wasn't possible. Ayla stepped forward, speaking for the first time. Her voice was clear, controlled, but carried an edge sharp enough to cut. Father, if Neshoba has truly turned rogue, we need to know his target. This man might be our only connection to the settlers, our only way to warn them and prevent the massacre that will justify Vance's war. Kyle looked at his daughter, and Ethan saw something pass between them, a communication deeper than words. Finally, Kale nodded. Cut his bonds, he ordered. Warriors moved forward, slicing through the ropes. Ethan rubbed feeling back into his wrists, staying on his knees. Stand, Kale said. If I decide to kill you, I'll do it while you can see it coming. Ethan rose, aware of the eyes on him, the weapons still ready. He was one wrong word from death. I'll make you a deal, Kyle said. Not for your sake. For Tala's, because he believes in you, and for my people's. Because maybe, you're right about what comes next. He stepped closer, and Ethan had to force himself not to step back from the intensity in those dark eyes. I'll send scouts to track Neshoba, find out his target. If we can stop him before he attacks, before he gives Vance his excuse, then we'll talk about your peace. But if Neshoba succeeds, if blood is spilled before we can prevent it, then there will be no deals, no negotiation, only war. Understood. Good. Kale turned to his warriors. Double the scouts. I want Neshoba's location by nightfall. Send riders to our sister camps. I want every warrior ready to move. He looked back at Ethan. You'll stay here until we know more. If you try to leave, you'll be killed. If you cause trouble, you'll be killed. If I even suspect you're lying about any of this, you'll be killed very slowly. Are we clear? Crystal. Then welcome to our home, Scout Rourke. I hope for all our sakes that your impossible plan works. As warriors led Ethan away to a guarded wickiup, he caught one last glimpse of Ayla. She was watching him, her expression unreadable. Their eyes met for a heartbeat, and Ethan felt that strange shift in his chest again, like something important had just happened, even if he couldn't name what. Then the hide flap fell, and he was alone in the dim interior, left to wait and wonder if he'd just saved everyone or doomed them all. Outside, the Apache camp moved with new urgency. Scouts mounted and rode out. Warriors checked weapons. Elders gathered in tight circles, their faces grave. And somewhere out there in the desert, Neshoba and his 20 warriors rode toward violence, toward war, toward a point of no return. The race had begun. The hours crawled past like wounded animals. Ethan sat in the dim wickiup, listening to the camp's rhythms, children's laughter cutting through tension, women's voices rising and falling in conversation, the steady percussion of daily life continuing despite the crisis brewing at the edges. A guard stood outside, silent and watchful, his shadow visible through gaps in the hide covering. Ethan's mind wouldn't settle. He kept running through scenarios, each one ending in blood. Neshoba attacking a settlement, Vance retaliating with overwhelming force, the careful balance Kael had maintained for years shattering in a single night of violence. And here he sat, useless, waiting for news that might already be too late. The hide flap lifted and Ayla entered, carrying a clay bowl that steamed in the cool air. She moved with the same quiet authority he'd noticed earlier, setting the bowl down before him without ceremony. "Eat," she said. Her English carried only the slightest accent, each word precise and deliberate. "You'll need strength for what comes next." Ethan looked at the bowl, some kind of stew, meat, and roots he couldn't identify. "Thank you." She didn't leave. Instead, she settled across from him, her dark eyes studying him with unsettling intensity. "Tala says you argued with your colonel, that you wanted a different path. Vance isn't my colonel anymore. Hasn't been for 2 years. But he was once. You followed his orders, led soldiers to our hunting grounds." It wasn't a question. Ethan met her gaze. "I did. I told myself I was just doing my job, that I was helping prevent worse violence by making the patrols more efficient. Took me longer than it should have to realize I was just making it easier to hunt your people. And now you want redemption. Now I want to stop watching people die for no good reason." He picked up the bowl, the warmth seeping into his hands. "Redemption's too big a word for what I deserve." Ayla tilted her head, considering him. "You're not what I expected. Most white men either hate us openly or pretend sympathy while stealing our land. You seem to actually see us as people. That shouldn't be remarkable. And yet it is." She paused, then asked the question he'd been dreading. "Do you really think this can work? Peace between our peoples?" Ethan wanted to lie, to give her hope, but something about her steady gaze demanded honesty. "I think the odds are terrible. I think there are men on both sides who want war and will do everything they can to make sure it happens. But I also think if we don't try, if we just let Neshoba and Vance drag us into slaughter, then we're no better than them. My father thinks you're either very brave or very stupid. What do you think?" A slight smile touched her lips. "I think you're both. Which might be exactly what this impossible situation needs." She stood, moving toward the entrance, then paused. "The scouts should return soon. If they found Neshoba's trail, my father will want to move quickly. Be ready." "Wait," Ethan said. "Why are you helping me? You have even more reason to hate whites than most of your people. I saw your face when Kael mentioned the women killed at the water source." Ayla's expression hardened. "That was my mother. She and 6 others gathering water for the camp. The soldiers said they thought the water bags were weapons." Her voice remained steady, but Ethan heard the rage beneath it, cold and controlled. "I was 12. I watched from the rocks, too far away to help, close enough to see everything." Ethan felt the weight of it settle on him, another stone in the cairn of guilt he carried. "I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't resurrect the dead, but maybe preventing more death counts for something." She looked at him, and for a moment the armor cracked. I'm tired of burying people I love. If you can actually stop this war, then I'll swallow my hate long enough to help you try. After that, we'll see. She left before he could respond. Ethan sat in the gathering darkness, the stew forgotten, thinking about a 12-year-old girl watching her mother die and somehow growing into a woman still willing to consider peace. It shamed him. Night fell over the camp. Ethan dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. Sometime after midnight, urgent voices pulled him fully conscious. He moved to the entrance, peering through a gap in the hide. Riders, 3 of them, dismounting in the center of camp. Their horses' flanks heaved, foam-flecked from hard running. Kale emerged from his wickiup, Ayla close behind. Warriors gathered, forming a loose circle. The lead scout spoke rapidly in Apache, his gestures sharp and agitated. Even without understanding the words, Ethan could read the body language. Bad news, delivered fast. Kale's expression darkened. He snapped questions, got quick responses, then turned to survey the camp. His eyes found the wickiup where Ethan waited, and he made a sharp gesture. The guard pulled back the hide flap. Come, he ordered. Ethan stepped out into a scene of controlled chaos. Warriors were arming themselves, checking weapons, preparing for movement. Women packed supplies with practiced efficiency. Even the children had been gathered, their usual play silenced by the tension. Kale stood at the center of it all, a map scratched in the dirt at his feet. Ayla and 3 other men, elders by their bearing, flanked him. He looked up as Ethan approached. Your warrior Neshoba, Kale said, his voice tight with anger. My scouts found his trail. He's heading for the Miller Ranch, 20 miles southwest of Copper Springs. Ethan's blood ran cold. He knew the Millers, a family of 5 hardworking farmers trying to scratch out a living on marginal land. The father, Jacob, had always been decent to the Apache, trading fairly when others wouldn't. 2 daughters, a son, and a pregnant wife. When? He asked. They'll hit at dawn, maybe 4 hours from now. Kale's jaw clenched. 20 warriors against 1 family. It's not a fight. It's a massacre. And it's exactly the kind of atrocity Vance needs to justify his campaign. We can stop it, Ethan said. If we ride now. We? One of the elders spoke, his voice harsh. You want us to fight our own people to save white settlers? I want to prevent a war that will kill everyone in this camp, Ethan shot back. Neshoba isn't acting for your people anymore. He's acting for himself, for his own pride. If he kills that family, Vance will have carte blanche from territorial command. He'll come with everything, cavalry, artillery, the works, and he won't stop until every Apache camp in the territory is ash. He speaks truth, Ayla said quietly. I've seen the reports from Kansas, from the Cheyenne campaigns. The pattern is always the same, 1 incident, 1 massacre, and suddenly there's unlimited authority to pacify the hostiles. Women, children, elders, it doesn't matter. They're all hostiles once the killing starts. The elder looked at her, something like betrayal in his eyes. You would side with him against Neshoba? I would side with survival against stupidity, she replied. Neshoba's rage is understandable, but it's also suicide for all of us. Kyle held up a hand, cutting off the brewing argument. We don't have time for debate. The question is simple. Do we let Neshoba start a war we can't win, or do we stop him and try to salvage peace? He looked at each elder in turn. I need your counsel, but I need it now. The eldest, a man with white hair and a face like carved wood, spoke slowly. I remember when the first whites came. They said they only wanted to pass through, that our lands would remain ours. Every promise was a lie. Every treaty was broken before the ink dried. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. But I also remember when we were strong, when our people numbered in the thousands. Now we hide in canyons and count our warriors by the dozen. Neshoba's pride is a luxury we can no longer afford. The others nodded, reluctant agreement written in their faces. Kale turned to Ethan. If we do this, if we stop Neshoba, what guarantee do we have that your colonel won't attack anyway? None, Ethan said honestly. But I can ride to Copper Springs. Tell them what you've done. Show them that you're willing to prevent violence against settlers. It won't make Vance trust you, but it might make the territorial governor question whether war is necessary. Might. It's the best I can offer. Kale studied him for a long moment, then nodded sharply. Ayla, gather 10 of our best warriors. We ride in 5 minutes. He looked at Ethan. You're coming too. If this goes wrong, I want you there to see what your faith in peace costs. The ride through the night was brutal. They pushed the horses hard, following trails only the Apache could see in the darkness. Ethan rode with Ayla, who'd been assigned to keep him from getting lost, or running, though both knew he wouldn't. Tell me about the Millers, she said as they navigated a dry wash. Why would Neshoba target them specifically? They have good land, reliable water. Strategically, it makes sense. The ranch sits on a route the Army uses for patrols. Hit it hard enough, and Vance has to respond. Ethan guided his horse around a boulder. But Jacob Miller also traded with your people. Neshoba might see that as collaboration, betrayal of his own kind. The same way some of our people see Tala's willingness to learn English as betrayal. Ayla's voice was bitter. We eat our own over who's pure enough, who's committed enough, while the real enemies laugh and sharpen their knives. Sounds familiar. During the war, I knew men who hated Yankee sympathizers more than they hated actual Yankees, ended up shooting their own neighbors over it. They rode in silence for a while, the night air cold against their faces. Around them, the Apache warriors moved like ghosts, silent and efficient. No wasted motion, no unnecessary sound. Ethan had fought these people, had tracked them through terrain that would kill most white men, and he still marveled at their skill. Can I ask you something? Ayla said suddenly. Sure. When you were scouting, when you led soldiers to our camps, did you ever think about the people you were hunting? Wonder about their lives, their families? It was a fair question, a hard one. At first, no. You don't, in war. Can't afford to. The enemy has to stay the enemy or you freeze up when it matters. He paused, remembering faces he'd tried to forget. But later, yeah. After the war ended and I kept doing it anyway, I started seeing them. Really seeing them. That's when it got hard. What changed? I met an old woman. Your people, I think, though I never knew which band. She was alone, dying, left behind when her camp moved because she couldn't keep up. I found her in a canyon, gave her water, some food. She didn't speak English, and my Apache was worse then than it is now, which is saying something, but we managed. Ethan could still see her face, the way her eyes had held no fear, only tired acceptance. She told me, as best we could communicate, about her grandson. Showed me something he'd carved for her, a little horse from cedar wood. She'd been a burden, she said. Her people couldn't afford to slow down for the old and useless, so she'd walked away one night, let them move on without her. What did you do? I stayed with her, 2 days, until she died. I buried her in that canyon, marked it with stones. He swallowed hard. The thing that got me, the thing I couldn't stop thinking about, was that carving. Some kid had made it for his grandmother, put love into every cut, and she'd valued it enough to keep it even when she had to leave everything else behind. That's when I realized I'd been hunting people, not just enemies, people who carved gifts for their grandmothers. Ayla was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer. My mother used to say that the whites weren't evil, just afraid. Afraid that if they saw us as human, they'd have to question everything they'd done to us. Easier to make us monsters. Your mother was wise. She was. Which is why the soldiers killed her. Wise people are dangerous to men who profit from war. They crested a rise, and Kyle held up a hand. The group stopped, horses blowing hard from the pace. Below them, maybe a mile distant, the Miller Ranch sat dark and quiet in the pre-dawn gloom. A single lantern burned in the window, probably Jacob up early to start chores. And approaching from the east, visible only because Kyle knew what to look for, a line of mounted warriors moved through the scrub. Neshoba, Kyle said, his voice flat. Right on schedule. We could still turn back, one of the warriors said. Let the whites defend themselves. And when they can't, Ayla shot back. When Neshoba kills that entire family, including the children, what then? You think Vance will investigate? Discover it was rogue Apache acting against their chief's wishes? Or will he just use it as an excuse to burn every camp he can find? The warrior had no answer. Kael made a quick series of gestures. The warriors spread out, taking positions that would let them intercept Neshoba's group before they reached the ranch. Ethan found himself next to Ayla, both of them dismounted, using a cluster of rocks for cover. "When the shooting starts," she said, checking her rifle, "stay down. This is going to get ugly fast." "I can fight." "I'm sure you can. But if you kill one of our people, even Neshoba's followers, it'll make everything worse. Better you stay out of it. Let us handle our own." She was right, and Ethan hated it. He felt useless, a spectator to violence he'd helped create. But he settled behind the rocks, Winchester ready, but not raised. Dawn began to break, the sky lightening from black to gray. Neshoba's warriors were close now, close enough that Ethan could count them. 22, not 20. Neshoba had picked up recruits somewhere. They rode with the casual confidence of men expecting no resistance. Why would they? The Millers were farmers, not fighters. Easy targets, a message written in blood. Kael waited until Neshoba's group was fully committed to the approach, too far from cover to retreat easily. Then he stood, rifle in hand but pointed at the ground, and called out in Apache. The effect was instantaneous. Neshoba's warriors pulled up hard, horses dancing as their riders tried to process what they were seeing. Their chief standing between them and their target, backed by armed warriors. Neshoba himself rode forward, his face twisted with rage and something that might have been betrayal. He was younger than Ethan expected, maybe 25, with the kind of anger that comes from watching too many people you love die. The exchange that followed was in rapid Apache, too fast for Ethan to catch more than a word here and there. But the body language told the story. Neshoba gesturing angrily at the ranch, at Kael, at the warriors who'd come to stop him. Kael standing firm, voice steady, making his case. "He's saying Kael has become weak," Ayla translated quietly. "That he's betrayed our people by protecting whites. Kael's telling him this isn't about protecting whites. It's about protecting our own people from a war we can't win." "Is it working? Look at Neshoba's warriors. See how some are lowering their weapons? They're not all committed to this. Some are just young men looking for direction, for someone to tell them how to fight back against everything they've lost." She paused. "If Kael can peel off enough of them, Neshoba will have to back down." But Neshoba wasn't backing down. His voice rose, sharp with fury, and he wheeled his horse around to face his followers. Another speech, this one clearly designed to inflame rather than reason. "He's calling them cowards," Ayla said, her voice tight. "Saying real warriors don't hesitate when—" The rifle shot cracked across the morning, loud and final. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Neshoba toppled from his horse, a red stain spreading across his chest. Ethan's head snapped toward the sound. There, on a ridge 300 yards away, a figure in army blue lowered a long rifle. Not alone. Behind him, a full patrol of cavalry appeared, at least 30 men, with Colonel Vance at their head. "Ambush," Ayla breathed. "They were waiting." Everything exploded into chaos. Neshoba's warriors scattered, some charging the cavalry, others breaking for cover. Kael's group found themselves caught in the middle, taking fire from both sides. The miller's house came alive with lights and shouts. Ethan made a decision. He stood, waving his arms at the cavalry, shouting in English, "Cease fire! Cease fire! They're trying to stop the attack!" A bullet whined past his head, close enough to feel the wind. Ayla yanked him down hard. "Are you insane?" she hissed. "They don't know what's happening. They think—" Another volley from the cavalry cut him off. One of Kael's warriors went down, then another. The Apache returned fire, efficient and deadly. 2 soldiers dropped from their saddles. Vance's voice carried across the battlefield, sharp with triumph. "Forward! Don't let them escape!" The cavalry charged, and what had been a tense standoff became a running battle. Ethan watched helplessly as Kael's careful plan dissolved into exactly the kind of violence they'd been trying to prevent. Ayla was on her feet, firing methodically at the advancing soldiers. Each shot counted, each one designed to wound or slow rather than kill. She was trying to buy time for Kael's warriors to disengage, to retreat. But Neshoba's followers, seeing their leader dead, had no interest in retreat. They charged the cavalry with savage fury, and the soldiers met them with disciplined volleys. Men died on both sides, blood soaking into the dry earth as the sun climbed higher. Ethan spotted Kyle, fighting to maintain some kind of order, trying to pull his warriors back from the slaughter. But war has its own momentum, and this one was rolling fast. A young Apache warrior, maybe 16, charged past Ethan's position. A soldier shot him in the leg. He went down hard, and the soldier advanced, rifle raised for the killing shot. Ethan moved without thinking. He tackled the soldier from the side, both of them crashing into the dust. The soldier recovered faster, swinging his rifle like a club. Ethan blocked it, barely, then drove his fist into the man's jaw. "Stand down!" he shouted. "I'm a scout! I'm white!" The soldier hesitated, confused. In that moment, the young Apache warrior limped away into cover. "Rourke?" The soldier's eyes widened in recognition. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Trying to stop this madness." Ethan grabbed the soldier's collar. "Listen to me. This isn't what it looks like. Kyle was trying to prevent the attack, not participate in it. You need to tell Vance." "Tell me what?" Ethan turned to find Colonel Vance himself, dismounted, pistol drawn, and pointed directly at Ethan's chest. The colonel looked older than Ethan remembered, his face lined with stress and something that might have been disappointment. "That you've turned traitor?" Vance continued. "That you're fighting alongside the savages now?" "I'm trying to prevent a war," Ethan said, slowly raising his hands. "Kyle was here to stop Neshoba's attack, not support it. Your ambush turned a peace effort into a bloodbath." Vance's laugh was ugly. "Peace effort. Of course. Is that what you call it when Apache warriors mass near a white settlement?" He gestured at the carnage around them. "I call it an attack in progress, which I stopped. Neshoba was the attacker. Kale came to prevent. I don't care about their tribal politics. I care that we just killed or scattered 24 warriors who were clearly preparing to raid the Millers. Mission accomplished." Vance's smile was cold. "And bonus, I have a white man who'll testify that the Apache can't be trusted, that even their so-called peace chief was involved in planning attacks. That's not what happened, and you know it. What I know is that you're under arrest for aiding the enemy during time of war. What the court-martial determines after that is up to them." Vance nodded to two soldiers. "Take him." Hands grabbed Ethan's arms, wrenching them behind his back. He struggled, but more soldiers piled on, and within seconds he was face down in the dirt, wrists being bound with rope. Through the dust, he saw Ayla. She was backing away, covering Kyle and the surviving warriors as they retreated. Her eyes met his across the battlefield, and Ethan saw rage there. Not at him, but at the situation, at the trap they'd walked into, at the way peace always seemed to curdle into violence. Then she was gone, vanishing into the rocks with the others. The shooting died down as the Apache disappeared into terrain the cavalry couldn't follow without taking heavy casualties. Vance let them go. He had what he wanted. Proof of Apache aggression, a body count to justify his next move, and a convenient scapegoat in Ethan Rourke. As the soldiers hauled Ethan to his feet, he saw Jacob Miller emerge from his house, rifle in hand, his family huddled behind him. The man's face showed confusion and relief in equal measure. Confusion at what had just happened, relief that his family had survived. He'd never know how close they'd come to massacre. Never know that both sides had been trying in their own way to protect him. Never know that the battle that saved his life had probably doomed the entire region to war. Vance walked over to Ethan, his expression satisfied. "You should have stayed gone, Rourke. Should have kept prospecting and forgotten about playing peacemaker. Now you're going to face trial for treason, and I'm going to get the full campaign I've been asking for." He leaned in close. "The territorial governor arrives in Copper Springs in 3 days. After I give him my report on this incident, he'll give me everything I need to finish the Apache once and for all." "You wanted this," Ethan said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "You knew about Neshoba somehow, set up the ambush, used us all to create the incident you needed." Vance's smile was answer enough. They threw Ethan over a horse and tied him down. As the patrol formed up for the ride back to Copper Springs, Ethan twisted his head to look at the battlefield. 4 Apache bodies, including Neshoba. 3 soldiers dead, 5 more wounded. The Miller Ranch stood untouched, smoke from breakfast fires rising peacefully into the morning air. A perfect disaster. The ride to Copper Springs took most of the day. Ethan spent it bouncing painfully on the horse, trying to think through options and coming up empty. Vance had outplayed him completely. The colonel had turned a peace effort into proof of Apache aggression and now had both the incident and the scapegoat he needed. They reached Copper Springs as the sun was setting. The town was small, maybe 200 people, built around a natural spring that made settlement possible in this harsh land. The main street featured a handful of businesses: general store, saloon, church, and the garrison that housed Vance's command. Word of the battle had preceded them. People lined the street as the patrol rode in, their faces showing the mix of relief and vindication that came from seeing dead Apache and a captured traitor. They locked Ethan in the garrison's single cell, a cramped space with stone walls and iron bars. No windows, no light except what leaked through from the outer office. Ethan sank onto the wooden bench that served as a bed and tried to think. Kyle had survived the ambush, so had Ayla, but the fragile trust they'd been building had died with Neshoba on that battlefield. Kale would see it as proof that whites couldn't be trusted, that Ethan had led them into a trap. And Ayla? Ethan refused to let himself think about what Ayla must believe now. Hours passed. Guards changed. Finally, well after dark, the cell door opened and Tala slipped inside. The boy looked better, stronger, though he still moved carefully. He settled on the bench beside Ethan, his expression troubled. "How did you get in here?" Ethan asked. "The guards know me. I've traded with them before, brought game meat for the soldiers. They think I'm harmless." Tala's smile was bitter. Useful, being underestimated. "Does Kyle know you're here?" "Kale is preparing for war. He thinks you betrayed us, led us into Vance's ambush." Tala looked at him. "Did you?" "No, I swear it. I had no idea Vance would be there." Tala studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you. But it doesn't matter what I believe. Kale lost 4 warriors today, including 2 who've been with him since they were boys. He's grieving, angry, and convinced that peace was always a lie." "What about Ayla?" "She's the only reason Kyle hasn't already started hitting settlements. She's arguing that we need to know the truth first, understand what really happened before we retaliate, but even her influence has limits." Ethan leaned back against the cold stone. "Vance wins. He gets his war, gets rid of me, and probably gets a promotion out of it. Meanwhile, both sides kill each other, and nothing changes except the body count." "Maybe." Tala was quiet for a moment. "Or maybe there's still a chance." "What chance? I'm locked in here, probably facing execution. Kyle's preparing to attack. Vance has the territorial governor showing up in 3 days to rubber stamp his campaign. Where's the chance in any of that?" "The governor is the chance. His name is William Bradford. He's a politician, which means he cares about reputation and avoiding scandals. If someone could get to him before Vance does, present a different version of events, maybe—" "Who? Who's going to do that? You?" Ethan shook his head. "They'd never let you near him." "Not me. Her." "Her who?" The cell door opened again, and Ayla stepped inside. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Ayla stood in the doorway, dressed not in traditional Apache clothing, but in a simple cotton dress that could pass for settler wear. Her long hair was pinned up, and in the dim light of the cell, she could have been any young woman from the territory. "You're insane," Ethan said, finding his voice. "If anyone recognizes you, they won't. To white eyes, we all look the same, remember?" Her tone was sharp, but her eyes showed the strain of what she was attempting. "Besides, Tala's right. Someone needs to reach the governor before Vance poisons his mind completely, and you're not exactly in a position to do it." She moved into the cell fully, and Tala closed the door behind her, standing guard. Ayla settled on the bench across from Ethan, her posture careful, controlled. This close, he could see the exhaustion in her face, the weight of everything that had gone wrong. "Your father sent you?" Ethan asked. "My father doesn't know I'm here. If he did, he'd lock me in our camp the same way Vance has you locked in this cell." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "After the battle, after we made it back, I watched him. Watched the grief turn to rage, the rage to certainty. He's convinced you led us into a trap, that peace was always impossible, that the only language whites understand is blood. And you don't believe that? I don't know what I believe anymore. Her voice carried a rawness that cut through Ethan's chest. I saw Neshoba die, saw our warriors fall, watched my father's hope turn to ash in the span of a heartbeat. Every instinct I have screams that you people can't be trusted, that my mother was wrong about fear being the real enemy. But, Ethan prompted softly, but I also saw your face when the shooting started, saw you try to stop it, risk yourself to protect that young warrior. Either you're the best liar I've ever met, or you actually meant what you said about preventing war. She leaned forward, her dark eyes searching his. So tell me true, Ethan Rourke. Did you know Vance would be there? No, I swear on everything I have left that I had no idea. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then we have a problem. Because if you didn't betray us, and we didn't betray you, that means Vance orchestrated the entire thing, which means he's not just an eager colonel, he's actively manufacturing war. That's what I tried to tell him. He knew about Neshoba somehow, knew the target, set up the ambush to catch everyone in the middle, create maximum chaos, maximum casualties, maximum justification for his campaign. Tala spoke from his position by the door. The question is, how did he know? Neshoba's plans were secret, known only to his closest followers, unless... He stopped, his face darkening with realization. Unless someone in your camp told him, Ethan finished. Someone working with Vance, feeding him information. Ayla's hands clenched into fists. If that's true, if one of our own people sold us out to the army, I'll kill them myself. First we have to prove it, Ethan said. And to do that, we need to stay alive long enough to reach Governor Bradford. Which brings us back to the original problem, Tala said. How do we get you out of here and get both of you to the governor before Vance can spin his version of events? Ayla stood, pacing the small cell like a caged mountain lion. Bradford arrives in 3 days. Vance will meet him immediately, probably at the territorial office with all his reports prepared. We'd need to intercept them either before that meeting or during it, which means breaking me out of a military garrison in the middle of a hostile town, Ethan said. Brilliant plan. What could go wrong? Do you have a better idea? Ayla challenged. Ethan thought hard. The cell was solid stone and iron, built to hold prisoners far more dangerous than a disgraced scout. Guards rotated every 4 hours, always 2 men, always armed. The garrison itself housed maybe 40 soldiers, all loyal to Vance, all believing Ethan was a traitor. But there was one advantage they had, one piece of leverage Vance hadn't considered. The Millers, Ethan said suddenly. Jacob Miller. He saw what happened, saw Apache warriors approaching his ranch and cavalry intervening. But he doesn't know the context, doesn't understand what was really happening. If we could get him to talk to the governor, tell him that the Apache attack never materialized, that the shooting started with Vance's men. Why would he help us? Ayla interrupted. He's a settler. We're the savages who've been raiding his neighbors for years. Because Jacob's a decent man who trades fairly and doesn't believe in unnecessary killing. And because I once helped him find water when his well ran dry, showed him where the underground streams ran. He owes me a favor. Tala moved closer, keeping his voice low. Even if Miller agrees to help, it doesn't solve the problem of getting you out of here. Maybe it does. An idea was forming, dangerous but possible. What if Miller doesn't help us escape? What if he demands it, publicly, loudly, in a way that makes Vance look bad if he refuses? Ayla's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. You want Miller to vouch for you, claim you were trying to prevent the attack, not participate in it. More than that, I want him to demand my release into his custody, claim that as the intended victim of the attack, he has a right to hear my testimony before any court-martial, make it a public spectacle, get the other settlers involved. Vance can't refuse without looking like he's hiding something. That's a lot of ifs, Tala said. If Miller believes you, if he's willing to risk angering the army, if the other settlers support him, if Vance doesn't just shoot everyone and claim you all tried to escape. I know the risks, Ethan said, but it's better than sitting here waiting for Vance to hang me. Ayla stopped pacing, her expression calculating. And once you're out, once Miller has you in his custody, then we have mobility. We can move, plan, reach Bradford when he arrives. With Miller's testimony in mind, maybe we can give the governor enough doubt to hold off on approving Vance's campaign. And my people? Ayla's voice went hard. While we're playing politics, my father is preparing for war. Every day we delay is another day he sends warriors out, another day settlers get killed or Apache get hunted. How do we stop that? Ethan met her eyes. You go back, talk to Cale. Tell him what we're planning, ask him to hold off just a few more days. If we can expose Vance's manipulation to Bradford, if we can show that peace is possible, my father won't listen. Not now, not after what happened. Then make him listen. Ethan's voice was urgent. You're his daughter. You have influence even if you don't always use it, and you're the only one who can reach him before this whole thing explodes into total war. Ayla looked at Tala, who nodded slowly. He's right. Cale is angry, but he's not stupid. If you can give him a reason to wait, a real plan instead of just hope, he might hold back long enough to see if it works. She turned back to Ethan, and for the first time since entering the cell, her armor cracked enough to show the fear beneath. If I'm wrong about you, if this is all some elaborate scheme to get us to lower our guard, my people will die because I trusted you. I know, and if you're wrong about Miller, if he refuses to help or turns on us, you'll die in this cell, and I'll have wasted the last chance to prepare my people for what's coming. I know that too. She studied him for a long moment, then extended her hand. Then we're both gambling everything on this working. Ethan took her hand, felt the calluses from a lifetime of hard living, the strength in her grip. Seems appropriate. This whole thing has been a gamble from the start. The ghost of a smile touched her lips. At least you're honest about the odds. She released his hand and turned to Tala. How long do I have before someone notices I'm gone? Dawn, maybe. I told Kyle I was scouting Copper Springs, checking garrison strength. He'll expect me back by morning. Then we move now. You go to Miller's ranch, convince him to come to town at first light, and make his demands public. I'll return to camp and work on my father. She looked at Ethan. And you stay alive until we can get you out. Not my first choice of activities, but I'll manage. Tala moved to the cell door, checking the corridor beyond. Guards change in 10 minutes. Ayla needs to be gone before then. She paused at the door, looking back at Ethan. Something passed between them, unspoken but profound. A recognition that they were bound together now, for better or worse, by choices that couldn't be unmade. Don't die, she said simply. Same to you. Then she was gone, Tala following to ensure she made it out of the garrison safely. Ethan sat alone in the darkness, listening to the sound of his own breathing, wondering if he'd just sent Ayla to her death or taken the first real step towards saving everyone. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Ethan tracked the guard changes by sound, boots on stone, muttered exchanges, the scrape of rifles against door frames. He tried to sleep and couldn't, his mind racing through scenarios, calculating odds, preparing for the dozen ways this could all go wrong. Somewhere around midnight, footsteps approached his cell. Not the guard. These were lighter, more hesitant. The cell door opened and a young private stepped inside, barely old enough to shave, his face troubled. Sir? The kid kept his voice low. I mean, Mr. Rourke? Ethan sat up. I'm not a sir anymore, son. What do you need? I was on the patrol today, at the Miller Ranch. The private shifted his weight nervously. I saw what happened. Saw you try to stop the shooting, try to warn us that something was wrong. But Colonel Vance, he told us you were signaling the Apache, trying to coordinate their attack. That's not what I was doing. I know, sir. I think I know. It didn't make sense to me the way it all went down. If the Apache were attacking, why were some of them trying to stop the others? Why were you waving at us instead of shooting? The kid's hands twisted together. My father always said you were a good scout. One of the few who tried to minimize bloodshed instead of maximize it. Said you saved his life once, up near the Gila River. Memory stirred. Private Carson? Yes, sir, Tom Carson. My father's James Carson. He rode with you back in '67. I remember your father. Good man. How's he doing? He passed 2 years ago. Fever. Tom swallowed hard. But before he died, he made me promise something. Said if I ever saw you in trouble, I should help if I could, because you'd earned better than what the Army usually gave scouts. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Your father was a good soldier and a better man. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you, sir. Tom glanced toward the corridor, then back to Ethan. I can't let you out. I don't have that authority, and it would get me shot for treason. But I can make sure you don't get shot trying to escape before your court-martial. And I can make sure certain people in town know you're here and what you're accused of. That's dangerous for you. So's ignoring a debt of honor. Tom straightened his shoulders. My father taught me that some things matter more than safety. This feels like one of them. After Tom left, Ethan lay back on the hard bench, staring at the darkness. Small acts of courage from unexpected places. A young private honoring his father's debt, a boy who'd been stabbed by his own people, still willing to help broker peace, a woman risking everything to prevent a war she had every right to want. Maybe there was hope after all. Maybe enough small acts of courage could add up to something that mattered. Dawn came slowly, light creeping through cracks in the stone. Ethan heard the garrison stirring, soldiers waking, horses being fed, the daily routine of military life continuing as if the world wasn't balanced on a knife's edge. The cell door opened and Vance himself entered, looking fresh and confident despite the early hour. He carried a tin cup of coffee, sipping it while studying Ethan like a specimen. Sleep well? The colonel asked pleasantly. Like the innocent man I am. Vance laughed. Still maintaining that fiction? Admirable. Pointless, but admirable. He settled onto the bench Ayla had occupied hours earlier. Let me tell you how this is going to proceed. Governor Bradford arrives tomorrow afternoon. I'll brief him on the situation, the Apache threat, yesterday's attack, your betrayal. He'll authorize my campaign, give me the resources I need to pacify this territory once and for all, and you'll hang for treason, probably within the week. Quite a story you've constructed. It's not a story. It's the truth, or at least the version that matters. You were found fighting alongside Apache warriors against cavalry troops protecting settlers. The facts speak for themselves. The facts are that Kyle was trying to prevent Neshoba's attack, and you turned a peace effort into a massacre. Vance's smile didn't waver. Who's going to believe that? The Apache? They're savages whose word means nothing. You're a disgraced scout with clear sympathies for the enemy. No, Rourke. The narrative is set, and you're on the wrong side of it. What about the Millers? They saw everything. They know no attack materialized. The Millers saw Apache warriors approaching their ranch and cavalry driving them off. They're grateful to be alive. They're not going to complicate things with questions about intentions and tribal politics. Vance finished his coffee and stood. You should have stayed in the prospecting business. Should have kept your head down and your nose out of things that don't concern you. Now you're going to die, and the Apache are going to be crushed, and I'm going to have the distinguished career I've earned. Everyone gets what they deserve. He left, locking the cell door behind him. Ethan listened to his footsteps fade, then allowed himself a tight smile. Vance was confident, maybe overconfident. That could be useful. The morning dragged on. Ethan was given breakfast, hardtack and water, barely enough to sustain life, but not worth complaining about. Guards changed. Soldiers went about their duties. The town beyond the garrison walls came to life with the sounds of commerce and conversation. Then, around mid-morning, a commotion erupted outside. Raised voices, someone demanding entry, soldiers trying to maintain order. Ethan moved to the cell bars, straining to hear. I don't care what your colonel says. That was Jacob Miller's voice, angry and insistent. That man saved my family's life, and I have a right to speak with him. Sir, you need to calm down. I'm perfectly calm, but I'm not leaving until I talk to Ethan Rourke. More voices joined in, and Ethan recognized several settlers from town. Tom Carson's quiet help had apparently spread the word faster than expected. A crowd was gathering, demanding answers, questioning the official narrative. Vance's voice cut through the noise. Mr. Miller, I understand your gratitude, but the man you're defending is accused of treason against the United States Army. This isn't a matter for civilian interference. Treason? Miller's laugh was sharp and disbelieving. From what I saw, he was trying to stop Apache warriors from fighting each other while your boys started shooting at everything that moved. If that's treason, then I don't understand the word. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it to me. Explain why Apache warriors were fighting each other instead of attacking my ranch. Explain why some of them looked like they were trying to prevent violence instead of cause it. Explain why a man you're calling a traitor tried to stop your soldiers from shooting." The crowd murmured agreement. Vance's carefully constructed narrative was developing cracks, and he knew it. "This matter will be resolved through proper military channels," Vance said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not leaving until I see him," Miller interrupted. "And neither are these good people. We have a right to understand what happened, to hear all sides before you hang a man who might have been trying to help us." Silence stretched. Ethan could imagine Vance's face, the calculations running behind his eyes. Refuse Miller and risk turning the settlers against him. Allow the visit and risk Ethan undermining his story. Either choice had consequences. Finally, Vance spoke. 5 minutes. You can speak with him for 5 minutes, under guard, and then you leave. Understood?" "Understood." Footsteps approached the cell. The door opened and Jacob Miller entered, flanked by 2 armed guards. He was a big man, weathered by years of hard farming, with honest eyes and calloused hands. He looked at Ethan for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Ethan." "Jacob. How's the family?" "Terrified but alive, thanks to whatever happened yesterday." He glanced at the guards, then lowered his voice slightly. "I need you to tell me true. Were you helping those warriors attack my ranch or preventing it?" "Preventing. A rogue Apache named Neshoba wanted to massacre your family to provoke a war. Chief Kyle brought warriors to stop him. I was there to help broker peace, but Vance ambushed everyone and turned it into exactly the bloodbath we were trying to avoid." Miller studied him, and Ethan could see the man weighing his words against his experiences, his gut feelings about character and truth. Finally, he spoke loud enough for the guards to hear. "I believe him." One of the guards shifted. "Sir, the colonel said—" "I know what the colonel said. I also know what I saw. Apache fighting Apache. Ethan trying to stop cavalry fire, and a whole lot of confusion that doesn't match a coordinated attack." Miller turned to face the guards directly. "I'm a loyal citizen of this territory. I pay my taxes, I follow the law, and I have every right to question when things don't add up. And this doesn't add up. Mr. Miller, you need to leave now." "I'll leave. But I'm going straight to the territorial office to file a formal complaint about this arrest. And I'm bringing every settler in town who wants answers about what really happened yesterday." He looked back at Ethan. "You hang in there. Truth has a way of coming out." After Miller left, Ethan sat back on the bench, allowing himself a moment of hope. The plan was working. Not perfectly, not easily, but working. Miller had publicly questioned Vance's narrative, had rallied other settlers to demand answers. The cracks were spreading. Now everything depended on whether Ayla could convince Kyle to hold back, and whether Tom Carson's quiet resistance had bought them enough time to reach Governor Bradford. The afternoon brought more visitors, though none were allowed into the cell. Through the walls, Ethan could hear arguments, settlers demanding explanations, Vance insisting on military authority, town leaders caught in the middle. The careful control Vance had maintained was slipping. As evening approached, Tala appeared at the cell window, a narrow slit high in the wall that Ethan hadn't thought accessible. The boy must have climbed the exterior wall, risking discovery to deliver his message. "Miller's doing his part," Tala whispered. "Half the town is demanding your release or at least a fair hearing. Vance is furious but has to maintain appearances. He's agreed to let a civilian representative attend your court-martial when it's convened." "What about Ayla? Did she make it back?" "She did. But Kyle's position is harder than expected. He lost warriors yesterday, including 2 of his most trusted men. The others are demanding retaliation, calling for immediate attacks on settlements. Ayla's trying to hold them back, but it's like trying to stop a flood with her bare hands." Ethan's chest tightened. "How long can she buy us?" "Maybe 2 days, 3 if she's persuasive and lucky. After that, the warriors will act with or without Kyle's permission, and then it won't matter what we tell the governor. There'll be fresh blood, fresh grievances, and any chance at peace will be dead." "What about the spy? Any luck finding who's feeding information to Vance?" "We have suspicions. A warrior named Takota has been acting strangely. disappearing for hours with weak excuses. But we have no proof, and accusing someone of betrayal without evidence would just create more divisions. So we're racing against multiple clocks. Vance preparing for Bradford's arrival, Kael's warriors preparing for revenge, and a spy potentially undermining everything. "Welcome to peace negotiations," Tala said with grim humor. "Same as war, just with more talking and less honesty." He disappeared from the window before guards could spot him, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. The night passed slowly, each hour heavy with tension and possibility. Tomorrow Bradford would arrive. Tomorrow all the pieces would either fall into place or scatter beyond recovery. Dawn came with unusual activity. Through the cell walls, Ethan heard soldiers cleaning the garrison, preparing for official inspection. Horses being groomed, equipment polished, the whole place being made ready for the territorial governor's critical eye. Mid-morning, Vance appeared again, this time with a corporal carrying a basin of water and a razor. "Clean yourself up," Vance ordered. "Governor Bradford arrives in 2 hours, and I want you presentable for when I introduce you as the traitor who tried to sabotage our defense of settler lives." "Thought you were waiting for the court-martial." "Change of plans. Bradford wants to see all parties involved in yesterday's incident. That includes you, the Millers, and my after-action report. He'll make his decision about the campaign based on the full picture." Vance's smile was sharp. "Of course, the picture I paint will be considerably different from the fantasy you've been selling." Ethan washed and shaved under guard supervision, noting the extra soldiers positioned around the garrison. Vance was taking no chances on an escape attempt. Smart, but it didn't matter. The escape plan had never been about breaking out through force. It was about creating enough doubt, enough questions, that Bradford would have to investigate before authorizing total war. The corporal brought different clothes, not his own, but civilian gear that was at least clean. Ethan dressed, wondering whose idea this was. Probably Vance's, wanting him to look less like a scout and more like a common criminal. At exactly noon, trumpet calls announced the governor's arrival. Through his cell window, Ethan could hear the commotion. Horses, carriages, an official procession entering Copper Springs with appropriate ceremony. Governor William Bradford had arrived, and with him, the future of the entire territory. They came for Ethan shortly after, 4 armed soldiers escorting him from the cell to the garrison's main office. The room had been converted into a makeshift hearing chamber, with Bradford seated behind Vance's desk like a judge. He was a politician through and through, well-dressed, carefully groomed, with the kind of face that gave away nothing and promised everything. Vance stood to one side, his reports arranged in neat stacks. On the other side, Jacob Miller waited with several other settlers, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. No sign of Ayla or any Apache representation, which made sense. Bradford wouldn't have allowed it even if Kyle had tried. "Mr. Rourke," Bradford said, his voice carrying the educated accent of Eastern establishment, "you stand accused of treason, of fighting alongside hostile Apache against United States military forces. How do you respond to these charges?" Ethan met the governor's eyes steadily. "Not guilty, sir. I was attempting to prevent an attack, not participate in one." "That's not what my report indicates," Vance interjected. "My men found him armed and fighting alongside Chief Kael's warriors against our patrol." "Your men found me trying to stop a bloodbath you created," Ethan shot back. "Chief Kael came to prevent a rogue warrior named Neshoba from massacring the Miller family. We were trying to preserve peace, and your ambush turned it into the war you wanted." Bradford raised a hand, silencing them both. "Let's establish facts before arguments. Mr. Miller, you were the intended target of this alleged attack. What did you observe?" Jacob Miller stepped forward, hat in hand but spine straight. "Governor, I saw Apache warriors approaching my ranch. I also saw other Apache warriors trying to stop them. I saw cavalry appear and start shooting, and I saw Ethan Rourke trying to halt the violence. What I didn't see was a coordinated attack on my family. What I saw was confusion, internal Apache conflict, and a military response that escalated rather than resolved the situation." "He's a civilian," Vance said quickly. "He doesn't understand military tactics or Apache deception. He's the man whose family's lives were supposedly at stake," Bradford interrupted. "I think his perspective matters. Continue, Mr. Miller." "Sir, I've lived in this territory for 8 years. I've seen Apache raids and I've seen peace efforts. What happened yesterday wasn't a raid. It was something else entirely, something that got turned into violence by people who maybe wanted violence more than answers. Vance's face darkened. Are you accusing my men of... I'm saying what I saw, and what I saw doesn't match what you're reporting. Bradford leaned back, fingers steepled. Colonel Vance, your report states that Chief Cale's forces were in position to attack the Miller Ranch when your patrol intervened. Do you have evidence of hostile intent beyond proximity? The evidence is in the context, sir. Kyle has been protecting rogue elements, allowing warriors like this Neshoba to operate without restraint. Actually, Ethan interrupted, Neshoba stabbed Kyle's nephew and deserted with his followers specifically because Kyle wouldn't allow attacks on settlers. That's the opposite of protection. Bradford's eyes sharpened with interest. You have knowledge of Apache internal politics? I was their scout for 5 years. I learned enough to know when leadership is trying to maintain peace and when it's breaking down. Kyle was trying to stop Neshoba. Your colonel turned that into justification for the campaign he's been requesting for months. Lies designed to protect his Apache friends, Vance said, but there was an edge of desperation in his voice now. Then why did I save an Apache boy's life only to lead cavalry to massacre his people? Ethan pressed. If I was betraying the army, why try to prevent Neshoba's attack? If I was betraying the Apache, why warn them about military movements? The only consistent thread in my actions is trying to prevent exactly the war you're eager to start. Bradford studied Ethan for a long moment, then turned to Vance. Colonel, I'm troubled by inconsistencies in your narrative. If Chief Kyle was attempting to prevent an attack by rogue elements, that suggests he's a moderating influence, not an enemy combatant. Attacking his forces while they're trying to maintain order seems counterproductive to our goal of peaceful settlement. With respect, sir, the Apache can't be trusted to police themselves, and yet Mr. Miller indicates they were doing exactly that when your patrol intervened. Bradford's voice had gone cold. I'm also troubled by the timing. You've been requesting authorization for a full military campaign for 6 months. Suddenly, an incident occurs that perfectly justifies everything you've been asking for. Convenient. Vance straightened. Sir, I resent the implication. I'm not implying anything, Colonel. I'm observing facts and drawing conclusions. Bradford stood, and everyone in the room tensed. Here's what's going to happen. Mr. Rourke will be released into civilian custody pending a full investigation. I want depositions from every soldier present at yesterday's engagement, statements from the Miller family, and if possible, communication with Chief Kyle to understand the Apache perspective. You can't negotiate with savages. Vance's control finally broke. They'll see it as weakness, exploit any opening. I can and will explore all available information before authorizing a campaign that could cost hundreds of lives and thousands of dollars. Bradford's voice cracked like a whip. Your request for expanded military operations is denied pending completion of this investigation. Is that clear? Vance's face had gone white with rage, but he managed a stiff nod. Yes, sir. Good. Mr. Miller, you'll take custody of Mr. Rourke. Keep him available for questioning. Bradford began gathering papers. We'll reconvene in 3 days once I've had time to review all evidence. Dismissed. The room emptied quickly. Ethan found himself outside the garrison for the first time in 2 days, Jacob Miller at his side, both of them flanked by curious settlers and fuming soldiers. Well, Miller said quietly, that went better than expected. It bought us time, Ethan agreed, but Vance isn't going to sit idle while Bradford investigates. He'll find ways to undermine anything that threatens his campaign. Then we'd better make sure Bradford gets the truth before Vance can bury it. They were halfway to Miller's wagon when the explosion tore through the morning air. The blast came from the east side of town, a thunderous boom that rattled windows and sent birds screaming into the sky. Smoke billowed up in a dark column, thick and angry against the clear afternoon. People screamed, running in every direction, soldiers shouting orders, chaos erupting in the space of a heartbeat. Ethan's first instinct was to run toward the explosion, but Miller grabbed his arm. Don't! That's what they want. They who? Whoever just gave Vance his justification back. Miller's face was grim. We need to get you somewhere safe before this whole town turns into a lynching party. He was right. Already Ethan could hear the accusations starting, settlers shouting about Apache attacks, soldiers scrambling for weapons. The careful doubt Bradford had created was evaporating like water on hot stone. They made it to Miller's wagon and climbed aboard, Miller snapping the reins hard. The horses lunged forward, carrying them away from the garrison as more explosions echoed through Copper Springs, smaller than the first, but no less terrifying. "Where are we going?" Ethan asked, gripping the wagon seat as they bounced over rough ground. "My ranch. It's defensible, and my family knows how to shoot if it comes to that." Miller guided the horses onto the road leading southwest. "Question is, what the hell just happened back there?" Ethan's mind was racing, putting pieces together. The timing was too perfect, the target too calculated. Vance has to be. Bradford was about to investigate, question his narrative. So something happens that makes investigation impossible, that forces Bradford's hand. "You think Vance blew up his own town?" "I think Vance is desperate enough to blow up anything that threatens his campaign." Ethan looked back at the smoke rising over Copper Springs. "Or someone working with him did. Either way, it's exactly what he needs. Fresh violence to prove the Apache can't be trusted." But even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. The explosions had been too well coordinated, too sophisticated for a simple false flag operation. And if Vance was willing to kill his own people for justification, what else was he capable of? They rode hard for an hour, putting distance between themselves and the chaos. When Miller's ranch finally came into view, Ethan felt a small measure of relief. The sturdy house sat on a slight rise, with clear sightlines in every direction, good water from the spring that gave the town its name. Defensible, like Miller had said. Miller's wife, Sarah, met them at the door, her face tense. "Jacob, we heard the explosions. What's happening?" "Don't know yet, but we're staying put until we do." He helped Ethan down from the wagon. "Sarah, this is Ethan Rourke. He'll be staying with us for a while." Sarah studied Ethan with sharp eyes. "The scout the army arrested? The one they say is a traitor?" "The one who tried to prevent a massacre yesterday and got blamed for it," Miller corrected. "He's under my custody now, at the governor's order." She considered this, then nodded. "Well, any friend of Jacob's is welcome here. Come inside, both of you. Looks like you could use coffee and answers, though I'm not sure which we have more of." Inside, the house was simple but comfortable. Rough-hewn furniture built to last, children's drawings on the walls, the smell of fresh bread from that morning's baking. Miller's 3 children peered from doorways, curious and cautious. Miller poured coffee while Sarah gathered the children to keep them occupied. Ethan stood by the window, watching the smoke still visible on the horizon, his mind working through possibilities and probabilities, none of them good. "What's our play?" Miller asked, handing him a cup. "Bradford's investigation just got complicated, and Vance has fresh ammunition for his war. We need to know what actually happened. Was it really Apache who set those explosions? Or was it staged to look that way?" Ethan sipped the bitter coffee, grateful for its warmth. "And we need to get word to Kael before his warriors retaliate for something they didn't do." "How?" "Town's probably under martial law by now, patrols everywhere. You ride out and you'll get shot on sight." Ethan was about to respond when a shadow moved outside the window. He tensed, hand dropping to where his gun should have been, but wasn't, the soldiers having kept all his weapons. Miller saw it too and reached for his rifle. The knock on the door was soft, almost apologetic. Sarah appeared from the back room. "I'll get it." "Wait," Miller started, but she'd already opened the door. Tala stood on the threshold, blood staining his shirt, exhaustion written in every line of his young face. Behind him, supported by his arm, was Ayla. She was wounded, a gash across her temple still seeping blood, her dress torn and filthy. "We need help," Tala said simply. Then both of them collapsed. Miller and Ethan caught them before they hit the floor, dragging them inside. Sarah immediately took charge, her frontier practicality overriding any shock at having Apache in her home. "Get them to the table. Jacob, fetch the medical supplies. She pointed at Ethan. "Heat water on the stove. Move." They worked quickly, Sarah cleaning Ayla's head wound while Ethan tended to Tala's injuries. Several shallow cuts and one deeper gash in his side that had bled heavily. Neither wound was fatal, but both had lost blood and looked like they'd been running for hours. Ayla came around first, her eyes snapping open with the wariness of someone who'd learned to wake ready for violence. She took in the room, the Millers, Ethan, then relaxed slightly. "Where are we?" Her voice was rough. "Miller Ranch," Ethan said, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. "You're safe. What happened?" "Ambush at our camp." She tried to sit up, winced, let Sarah push her back down. "We were preparing to send a delegation to Bradford, trying to arrange official talks like you suggested. Then warriors appeared, not ours, at least not ones loyal to my father. They attacked without warning." Tala stirred, consciousness returning. "Dakota, the spy. He led them straight in, signaled their approach. They hit fast, targeted the elders, and my uncle specifically." Ethan's blood ran cold. "KL? Alive, but wounded, fighting when we left." Ayla's eyes met Ethan's, and he saw the pain there, deeper than any physical injury. "They weren't trying to kill everyone, just create chaos, make it look like internal fighting. And while that was happening, the explosions in Copper Springs," Ethan finished, "coordinated. Hit both sides at once, make it look like all-out war has started." Miller stood by the window, watching for threats. "How many attacking your camp?" "Maybe 15. But they knew exactly where to strike, who to target. Dakota gave them everything, guard positions, elder locations, my father's wiki-up." Ayla's voice was bitter with betrayal. "They weren't trying to conquer, just wound us badly enough that we'd have to retaliate." "And the explosions give Vance his justification to hit back first," Ethan said. "He forces both sides into war whether anyone wants it or not." Sarah finished bandaging Ayla's head. "So what do we do? We can't stop a war from a ranch in the middle of nowhere." "No," Ethan agreed. "But we can expose who's really behind it. If we can prove Vance orchestrated both attacks, if we can show Bradford that this whole thing is manufactured—" "Prove it how?" Miller asked. "The town's burning. The Apache camp is under attack, and we're sitting here with an escaped prisoner and 2 wounded Apache. Not exactly a position of strength. We have Tala and Ayla. They're witnesses to the attack on their camp, can identify Dakota as the traitor." Ethan paced, thinking out loud. "And if Dakota was working with Vance, there has to be evidence, payments, meetings, something that ties them together." "Dakota's back at our camp," Ayla said. "If he survived, if my father hasn't already killed him. But even if we capture him, make him talk, who would believe us? We're the enemy. Our word means nothing to your people." She was right, and Ethan knew it. They needed more than Apache testimony. They needed proof that even Bradford couldn't ignore. "The explosions," Tala said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. The boy was sitting up now, holding his bandaged side. "They weren't Apache work. We don't use explosives like that. Whoever set them knew what they were doing, had access to military-grade powder and fuses." "Which points to soldiers," Miller said. "But proving it means getting back into Copper Springs, finding physical evidence before Vance destroys it." "That's suicide," Sarah said flatly. "The whole town thinks Apache just attacked them. You walk in there, especially with Ethan, and you'll all get shot. Then we don't walk in. We wait for dark, move quietly, find what we need, and get out." Ethan looked at each of them in turn. "I know it's dangerous. I know the odds are terrible. But if we don't expose Vance now, there won't be another chance. He'll have his war, and everyone in this room will be dead within the month, along with hundreds of others." "I'm going," Ayla said, struggling to stand. "My people are dying because of this. I won't hide while Vance destroys everything my father tried to build." "You can barely walk," Ethan protested. "Then I'll crawl if I have to." Her eyes flashed with determination. "This is my fight as much as yours." Tala stood as well, swaying but upright. "And mine. I brought you into this. I'll see it through." Miller looked at his wife. Some silent communication passed between them, the kind that only comes from years of partnership. Finally, Sarah nodded. "All right," Miller said. "We do this tonight. Sarah will stay here with the children, keep watch. The 4 of us go into town, find evidence, and get it to Bradford before Vance can spin this into the war he wants." He checked his rifle. "Anyone changes their mind, speak now. Once we commit, there's no turning back." Nobody spoke. They spent the afternoon preparing. Sarah provided clean clothes for Ayla and Tala, settler garb that would help them blend in darkness. Miller checked weapons, distributed ammunition, planned routes through town that would minimize exposure. Ethan studied what he remembered of Copper Springs' layout, identifying where military supplies would be stored, where Vance might have kept evidence of his conspiracy. As the sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of amber and crimson, they gathered by the wagon. Sarah hugged her husband fiercely, whispering something in his ear that made him nod and hold her tighter. The children watched from the window, too young to fully understand, but old enough to know something important was happening. "If we're not back by dawn," Miller told his wife, "take the children east to Fort Prescott. There's an officer there named Captain Henderson who owes me a favor. He'll protect you until this blows over." "You come back," Sarah said. It wasn't a request. "I'll do my best." They rode out as twilight deepened, 4 people on a mission that could end a war or ignite one beyond stopping. The smoke over Copper Springs had lessened, but still visible, a dark smudge against the darkening sky. An hour from town, they abandoned the wagon and continued on foot. Tala took point, his Apache training making him nearly invisible in the gathering darkness. Ayla followed, moving more steadily now that the shock of her wounds had passed. Miller and Ethan brought up the rear, weapons ready, eyes scanning for patrols. They could hear Copper Springs before they saw it, voices raised in anger and fear, hammering as people repaired damaged buildings, the nervous whinny of horses. The explosions had torn through the eastern quarter, destroying 3 buildings and damaging several more. But what struck Ethan most was the absence of bodies. For attacks supposedly aimed at killing civilians, there were remarkably few casualties. "Deliberate," Ayla whispered as they crouched in the scrub outside town. "Whoever set those charges placed them to create damage and fear, not death. Maximum terror, minimum guilt." "Vance doesn't want to explain dead civilians to Bradford," Ethan agreed. "Just enough violence to justify response, not enough to trigger uncomfortable questions." Tala pointed toward the garrison. "Guard presence is doubled. They're expecting trouble." "Then we don't go through the front." Miller gestured toward the rear of town. "There's an old mine shaft behind the assay office. Connects to the cellar of the general store. Owner's a friend. He'll look the other way if we need to come up through his floor." They circled wide, using darkness and terrain to mask their approach. The mine entrance was right where Miller remembered, partially concealed by brush and neglect. They descended carefully, following a narrow passage that had been carved decades earlier by optimistic prospectors. The tunnel was cramped and dark, forcing them to move in single file with only a shuttered lantern for light. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. The air tasted of earth and old dreams gone sour. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only minutes, they reached the cellar access. Miller went first, pushing up through the trapdoor into the general store's basement. A moment later, his voice came back down, soft but clear. "All safe. Come up." They emerged into a cellar stacked with supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, all the essentials of frontier life. Above them, floorboards creaked with footsteps. Miller led them to a corner staircase that opened into the store's back room. The owner, an older man named Pete, was waiting. His eyes widened at the sight of Ayla and Tala in settler clothes, but he kept his voice low. "Jacob, what the hell are you doing bringing Apache into my store?" "Preventing a war, Pete. We need information about the explosions, who set them, where they got the materials." Pete's weathered face twisted with indecision, then he sighed. "I knew this day would come. Knew Vance was up to something when he requisitioned all that blasting powder 3 weeks ago. Said it was for clearing rocks from the road to Fort Prescott, but the amounts didn't make sense for that kind of work." "You have records?" Ethan asked. "Of course I have records. Territorial law requires documentation of all explosive sales." Pete moved to a desk and pulled out a ledger. "Here, 30 pounds of blasting powder, fuses, caps, everything you'd need to bring down buildings if you knew what you were doing." Ethan scanned the entries. Vance's signature was right there, bold and unmistakable. Proof that he'd acquired the materials, but not that he'd used them for the attacks. "We need more," Ayla said. "This shows he had access, but not intent." "Then you need to find the blast sites," Pete said. "If the explosions were set by someone with military training, there'll be evidence in how they were placed, how the charges were configured. Amateur work looks different from professional demolition." "The eastern quarter's crawling with soldiers," Miller objected. "We can't just walk in and examine explosion sites." "No," Tala said slowly. But we could if we were soldiers doing exactly that, investigating the damage, securing the area, looking for evidence of who attacked. They all looked at him. You want to impersonate cavalry? Ethan asked. Why not? It's dark. The town's in chaos. We steal uniforms from somewhere, walk in like we belong there, gather our evidence, and leave before anyone thinks to question us. It was insane. It was also the best plan they had. The uniforms came from a laundry behind the garrison, fresh cleaned and waiting for pickup. They fit poorly, but in darkness and confusion, that wouldn't matter. Miller and Ethan looked reasonably authentic. Tala's youth helped him pass as a young recruit. Ayla had to stay behind, her features too distinctly Apache to risk even in poor light. She didn't like it, but she accepted it. Be careful. And if something goes wrong, don't try to rescue me. Just get the evidence to Bradford. Ethan wanted to argue, to promise they wouldn't leave without her. But they both knew promises like that were meaningless in situations like this. The three men moved through Copper Springs' damaged quarter with the confidence of soldiers on official business. They passed several actual patrols, exchanging nods and terse words about securing the perimeter and searching for survivors. Nobody questioned them. The explosion sites were exactly as Pete had predicted, devastatingly effective but surgically precise. Charges placed to maximize structural damage while minimizing human casualties. The work of someone who knew explosives intimately and cared about appearances. Tala knelt by the remains of one blast point, examining debris with careful attention. Look at this. The fuse remnants. These are military issue, same type the Army uses for field demolitions. And the placement, he pointed to scarring on a support beam. This charge was set to bring down the building's corner, force it to collapse inward. That takes training. So we have military-grade materials, professional placement, and minimal casualties, Miller summarized. Exactly what you'd expect from someone staging an attack to look real without actually committing mass murder. But still not proof it was Vance, Ethan said, frustration building. We can show it wasn't Apache, but that's not the same as proving who it actually was. Maybe not direct proof, Tala said, but circumstantial evidence builds a picture. Bradford's a politician. He understands patterns and implications. We show him the powder requisition, the professional blast work, the convenient timing, and he'll have enough doubt to delay Vance's campaign while he investigates further. A voice cut through the darkness. Well, isn't this interesting? They turned to find Colonel Vance himself, flanked by 4 armed soldiers. His expression was almost amused, like he'd caught children stealing candy. Impersonating military personnel, Vance said. That's a hanging offense, even without the treason charge. Rourke, I'm almost impressed. I thought you'd run, maybe try to disappear into Mexico. Instead, you walk right back into my hands. Ethan's mind raced, calculating odds. 4 soldiers, all armed and alert. Miller had his rifle but couldn't get it up before they'd be shot. Tala was unarmed. No good options. It's over, Vance, Ethan said, playing for time. We have evidence. The powder requisition, blast analysis, everything we need to show Bradford what you did. Do you? Vance's smile didn't waver. Because all I see is a traitor and his accomplices caught in the act of sabotage, probably gathering information to send to their Apache allies. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you 3 were responsible for today's attacks, trying to frame the very people working to protect this territory. The narrative shift was masterful and terrifying. Vance was going to pin everything on them, turn their investigation into proof of guilt. Bradford won't believe that, Miller said. He's smarter than you think. Bradford is a politician in a territory on the edge of war. He'll believe what I tell him because believing anything else means admitting the military he depends on can't be trusted. Vance gestured to his soldiers. Take them into custody, all of them, and search the area. I want any evidence they've gathered destroyed. The soldiers moved forward. Ethan tensed, preparing for a fight he knew he couldn't win. Then a rifle shot cracked across the night, and one of Vance's soldiers dropped, clutching his leg. Chaos erupted. More shots from multiple directions, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness. Vance's men scattered, seeking cover. Miller grabbed Ethan and pulled him behind a collapsed wall. Who the hell is shooting? Ethan shouted over the noise. His answer came in the form of Apache warriors emerging from the darkness. but not attacking. They provided covering fire, allowing Ethan, Miller, and Tala to retreat. At their head, wounded but upright, was Chief Kyle himself. The old chief moved with the economy of a man who'd fought more battles than he could count. He reached Ethan's position and crouched beside him, blood still seeping from a bandage on his shoulder. "My daughter convinced me you were worth saving," Kyle said. "I hope for all our sakes she's right." "How did you know where to find us?" "Ayla followed you, sent a runner back to what's left of our camp, told me what you were attempting." Kale fired once, precisely, forcing Vance's men to stay down. "We need to leave. Now. More soldiers will be coming." They retreated through the darkness, Apache warriors covering their withdrawal with practiced efficiency. Behind them, Copper Springs erupted into full alarm, bells ringing, soldiers mobilizing, the night torn apart by shouts and gunfire. They regrouped at an abandoned homestead 3 miles from town, everyone breathing hard, checking for wounds. Kale's warriors numbered maybe 20, all that remained of his force after Dakota's betrayal and the subsequent attack. Ayla was there, having guided her father to their position. She moved to Ethan immediately, her expression fierce with relief and residual fear. "You could have been killed," she said. "So could you, following us like that. Someone had to make sure you didn't do anything stupid." Her hand found his, squeezed once, then released. "Did you get what you needed?" "We got evidence, but Vance knows we have it. He'll move against Bradford, force a decision before we can present our case." Ethan looked at Kyle. "Thank you for the rescue. I know it cost you." "It cost me warriors I couldn't afford to lose," Kale agreed. His expression was hard, unreadable. "My daughter believes you're trying to prevent war. I'm not convinced, but I'm willing to give you one more chance to prove it. What do you need?" "Access to Bradford. A way to get our evidence in front of him before Vance can spin this into justification for total war." "And how do you propose we do that? The governor is surrounded by soldiers loyal to Vance. Walking into Copper Springs again would be suicide." "Then we don't walk in. We bring Bradford to us." Everyone looked at Ethan like he'd lost his mind. "Bring a territorial governor into Apache territory?" Miller said. "That's insane." "No more insane than anything else we've tried." Ethan's plan was forming even as he spoke. "Bradford wants the truth. He said so himself. He's not authorizing war until he's investigated properly. We give him that chance. Neutral ground, both sides represented, everything laid out in the open." "He'll never agree," Kyle said flatly. "He will if we make it impossible for him to refuse. If we publicly invite him, if we guarantee his safety, if we make it clear that we're offering peace, and he's the one who has to choose whether to accept it." Ethan looked at each of them, Kyle's weathered face, Ayla's determined eyes, Miller's steady presence, Tala's youthful courage. "We've been letting Vance control the narrative this whole time. Time to take it back." Kale was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone making a decision that could doom his people. "Where and when?" "Tomorrow, noon. The canyon where you buried your dead after the last big battle." Ethan met the chief's eyes. The place Vance promised would remain Apache territory forever, then sent patrols through 2 weeks later. Let Bradford see where his colonel's promises end up. It was a risk, a massive, potentially fatal risk. But as Ethan looked around at the exhausted, wounded, desperate people surrounding him, he realized they were out of safe options. They either forced the truth into the light now or watched everything collapse into violence that would consume them all. Kale extended his hand. "One more chance, Scout Rourke. Don't waste it." Ethan took his hand, felt the strength in that grip, the history and pain and faint, fragile hope. "I won't." The night passed in preparation and planning. Kyle sent runners to trusted allies, calling in what few favors remained. Tala rode for the Miller Ranch to tell Sarah what was happening, to make sure she understood that if this went wrong, she needed to take her family and run. Ayla worked with her father's warriors, preparing the canyon, setting up defensive positions not to attack but to protect. If Vance tried to turn this into an ambush, they'd be ready. And Ethan, Miller, and 3 of Kyle's most trusted warriors rode for Copper Springs one last time, carrying a message that would either save the territory or doom it forever. They reached the town just before dawn, exhausted and filthy but alive. Private Tom Carson was on guard duty. Whether by luck or design, Ethan would never know. The young soldier's eyes widened when he recognized them. "Sir, you need to leave. Colonel's got every man searching for you. I need to see Governor Bradford. Can you get a message to him?" Tom hesitated, loyalty warring with something deeper. Finally, he nodded. "The governor's staying at the Thompson house. I can get word to him, but I can't stop the colonel from finding out." "Don't need you to. Just tell Bradford that Chief Kyle is inviting him to a peace council, noon today at the Burial Canyon. Both sides present evidence. Let him decide what's true. Tell him it's his last chance to prevent a war. And if he refuses, then we tried everything we could, and what comes next is on him." Tom disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. Ethan and the others retreated to the edge of town, waiting, watching the sky lighten from black to gray to the pale gold of early morning. An hour later, Tom returned. "He'll come. Says he's bringing 2 officers as witnesses. Wants your word that they'll be safe." "They have it," Ethan said. "Anyone who comes in good faith leaves unharmed, regardless of what happens." "And the colonel? What about him?" "He's insisting on being one of the officers. Says he won't let Bradford walk into a trap without military protection." Of course, Vance would insert himself. The man was too smart to let Bradford hear evidence without being there to contradict it. "Fine," Ethan said. "Tell the governor noon at the Burial Canyon. Come armed if it makes him feel safer, but come ready to listen." They rode back toward the canyon as the sun climbed higher, knowing that in a few hours everything would be decided: war or peace, truth or lies, life or death for everyone in the territory. Ethan looked at Miller, riding beside him. "You didn't sign up for this. You could still ride away, take your family somewhere safe." "Could have done that days ago," Miller replied. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't get yourself killed before you finish what you started." As they crested the rise overlooking the Burial Canyon, Ethan saw both Apache and settlers gathering. Not armies, witnesses. People from both sides who'd lost loved ones to the violence, who'd suffered under the weight of endless war, who just wanted to see if peace was actually possible. The stage was set. The players were assembling, and in a few hours, the truth would either set them free or bury them all. The Burial Canyon was a sacred place, carved by ancient water into red stone walls that rose 100 feet on either side. At its base, where the sun reached for only a few hours each day, the Apache had laid their dead for generations. Cairns of stacked stones marked graves, each one a life cut short by violence, disease, or the simple brutality of existence in this harsh land. Ethan stood at the canyon's entrance as noon approached, watching both groups gather on opposite sides of the open ground. To the east, Apache warriors and families, maybe 60 people total, all that remained of Kyle's once substantial band. To the west, settlers from Copper Springs and surrounding ranches, perhaps 40 strong, faces hard with suspicion and years of accumulated fear. In the center, a space had been cleared. 4 chairs arranged in a square, one for Bradford, one for Kyle, one for Ethan, and one that remained empty, waiting. Isla stood beside her father, her head wound bandaged but her spine straight, every inch the chief's daughter. Tala was there too, close to Kyle, his presence a statement that the old chief still valued those who sought understanding over blind revenge. Miller had positioned himself with the settlers but separate from them, making clear he was there as witness and participant, not simply audience. The sound of horses drew everyone's attention. Governor Bradford rode in with an escort of 6 soldiers, Colonel Vance among them. The governor looked older in daylight, the stress of the past days etched into his features. He dismounted carefully, studied the canyon with the appreciation of someone who understood symbolism, then walked toward the center ground. Vance followed, his hand never far from his sidearm, his eyes scanning the Apache positions for threats real or imagined. "Chief Kale," Bradford said, inclining his head with more respect than most white officials would have shown. "Thank you for this invitation. I hope it represents genuine desire for peace." Kyle stepped forward, his wounded shoulder evident in the stiffness of his movement. "I hope the same of you, Governor. Too many of my people lie beneath these stones because of broken promises. I would prefer not to add more." "Then we share a goal." Bradford settled into one of the chairs. "Mr. Rourke, I understand you requested this meeting. The floor is yours." Ethan took his seat, acutely aware of every eye on him, Apache, settler, soldier. This was it. No more running, no more delays. Everything came down to the next few minutes. 3 days ago, he began, his voice carrying across the canyon, a young Apache warrior named Neshoba rode toward the Miller Ranch with 20 followers, intending to massacre Jacob Miller's family. His goal was to provoke a war that Chief Kyle had spent years trying to prevent. Kyle brought his own warriors to stop Neshoba, to prove that the Apache leadership wanted peace, not bloodshed. That's not what my report shows, Vance interrupted. My report shows 2 groups of Apache warriors converging on a settler family, with military forces intervening to prevent an attack. Your report is a lie, Ethan said flatly, and the evidence proves it. Bradford held up a hand. Let's proceed methodically. Mr. Rourke, what evidence do you have? Ethan pulled out the ledger page Pete had provided. This shows Colonel Vance requisitioning 30 pounds of blasting powder 3 weeks ago. Military-grade explosives, supposedly for road clearing, but the amount was far more than needed for that purpose. I resent the implication, Vance said, but there was a tightness around his eyes. That powder was used for legitimate military engineering. Then why were the explosions in Copper Springs yesterday set with military fuses and professional placement? Tala stepped forward, holding fragments of fuse and detonator cap. I examined the blast sites. Whoever set those charges had military training in demolitions. The placement was designed to maximize structural damage while minimizing casualties, exactly what you'd want if you were staging an attack to justify military action without creating too many actual victims to explain. Bradford took the fragments, studied them. These are standard Army issue, which Apache warriors wouldn't have access to, Kyle said. We use fire, arrows, sometimes stolen rifles. We don't employ sophisticated explosive devices with precision fusing. Unless you had help from someone with military knowledge, Vance countered smoothly. Someone like Rourke, who's demonstrated clear sympathy for your cause. I was in your jail when those explosions happened, Ethan shot back. Unless you think I can set fuses through stone walls. You could have prepared them earlier, given them to Apache Confederates. Enough! Bradford's voice cut through the argument. Colonel Vance, these are serious allegations. Do you have evidence that Mr. Rourke was involved in the explosions? I have evidence he was fighting alongside Apache warriors against my troops. Because you ambushed a group trying to prevent an attack. Ethan stood, unable to contain his frustration. Neshoba was the rogue element. Kyle was trying to stop him. You knew about the attack in advance because someone in Kale's camp was feeding you information. You used that intelligence to set up an ambush that would make peace impossible and give you the war you've been requesting for months. Vance's expression hardened. That's a slanderous accusation with no basis in fact. Isn't it? Ayla's voice rang out, clear and sharp. She stepped into the center ground, moving with the controlled grace of someone pushing through pain. Then explain how your soldiers knew exactly where Neshoba would be. Explain how you arrived with a full patrol, in position at precisely the right time to intercept him. Either you're incredibly lucky or someone told you what was coming. Military intelligence came from Dakota. Kyle's voice was heavy with betrayal and rage. A warrior I trusted who sold information to your colonel in exchange for promises of safety when the war came. We captured him yesterday, after your attack on our camp. Before he died, he confirmed everything. Bradford turned to Vance, his expression grave. Is this true? Did you have an informant in Chief Kyle's camp? Intelligence gathering is standard military practice, Vance said, but his confidence was cracking. I make no apologies for using every available resource to protect settlers from hostile forces. Hostile forces who were trying to prevent an attack, Bradford said slowly. Hostile forces whose leader brought warriors to stop one of his own men from committing murder. He stood, pacing the center ground. Colonel, help me understand this. If Kyle was planning or supporting the attack on the Miller Ranch, why would he bring forces to stop it? Why would he expose himself and his warriors to cavalry fire to prevent something he supposedly wanted to happen? Vance had no good answer. The silence stretched, broken only by wind whistling through the canyon. Miller stepped forward from the settler group. Governor, I was there. I saw what happened. I saw Apache fighting Apache. I saw Colonel Vance's men arrive, not as rescuers responding to an emergency, but as soldiers executing a planned ambush. And I saw Ethan Rourke trying to stop the shooting, not encourage it. You're a civilian, Vance said, desperation edging into his voice. You don't understand military tactics. I understand murder dressed up as policy, Miller interrupted. I understand that you needed a war to advance your career, and when peace looked possible, you manufactured the crisis you required. Bradford walked to where Vance stood. Did you orchestrate the explosions in Copper Springs? Of course not. The Apache... Answer the question directly, Colonel. Did you or did you not use military explosives to stage an attack on the town you were supposed to protect? Vance's hand drifted toward his pistol. Around the canyon, soldiers and warriors tensed, sensing the moment crystallizing into something dangerous. I did what was necessary, Vance said finally, his voice low and hard. This territory is bleeding. The Apache raids never stop. The settlers keep dying, and politicians like you wring your hands about peace while good men die in the dirt. I gave you a clear enemy and a clear solution. All you had to do was authorize the campaign and let the army finish this. By killing innocent people? Bradford's voice was ice. By destroying property you were sworn to defend? By manipulating events to manufacture the very war you claimed to be preventing? By ending a conflict that has no other resolution? Vance's control finally broke. You think peace is possible with these savages? They'll smile and sign treaties while sharpening knives for our backs. The only language they understand is force, and the sooner we apply overwhelming force, the sooner this territory can actually be civilized. Kael's voice cut through the colonel's rage. I have buried 3 wives, 7 children, and more warriors than I can count. Every one of them died at white hands, soldiers, settlers, buffalo hunters who poisoned our water to clear the land for cattle. And yet here I stand, offering peace one more time, knowing that men like you will call it weakness and use it against me. He stepped into the center, facing Vance directly. You want to know why I keep trying? Because I remember when this land fed everyone who respected it. Because I've seen what war costs, and I'm tired of paying that price. And because my daughter convinced me that maybe, just maybe, there were white men who valued life more than territory. Ayla moved to stand beside her father. You can have your war, Colonel. You can kill us all, burn every camp, scatter the survivors into Mexico. But you'll never civilize this land because you don't understand what that word means. Civilization isn't about who can kill most efficiently. It's about who can choose not to when given the chance. Bradford stood silent for a long moment, his eyes moving from Vance to Kael to the gathered witnesses on both sides. Finally he spoke. Colonel Vance, you are hereby relieved of command and placed under arrest for the destruction of civilian property, conspiracy to incite war through false pretenses, and violation of your oath to protect the citizens of this territory. You will be transported to the territorial capital for court-martial. Vance's hand closed on his pistol grip. You can't do this. You don't have authority. I have every authority, Bradford said coldly. And if you draw that weapon, these soldiers will cut you down where you stand. Is that what you want? To die here, proving you were always more interested in fighting than protecting? For a heartbeat, violence hung in the air like heat shimmer. Then Vance's hand slowly moved away from the pistol. 2 soldiers moved forward, disarming him and binding his hands. He didn't struggle, but the look he gave Ethan was pure murder. This isn't over, Vance said as they led him away. You think you've won, but all you've done is delay the inevitable. They'll kill you all eventually. It's what they do. Then he was gone, escorted from the canyon by soldiers whose expressions showed they didn't entirely disagree with him. Bradford turned to Kael. Chief, I cannot undo what's been done to your people. I cannot resurrect the dead or erase the betrayals. But I can offer you something I believe you've never been given by a territorial official, an honest attempt at lasting peace. What kind of peace? Kael's voice was cautious, decades of broken promises weighing every word. One based on agreements that both sides help write, protected hunting grounds that soldiers will not violate, trade relationships that benefit everyone. Most importantly, a commitment that actions like Colonel Vance's will be investigated and punished, not rewarded. Bradford paused. It won't be perfect. There will be incidents, misunderstandings, people on both sides who resist. But if we commit to talking instead of killing, to settling disputes instead of escalating them, maybe we can build something that lasts. Words, Kael said. I've heard beautiful words before. Then judge me by actions. I'll start by establishing a joint council. 3 Apache representatives, 3 settler representatives, and me as mediator. Any dispute goes through the council before weapons are drawn. Anyone who violates that process faces consequences regardless of which side they're on. Bradford looked around the canyon at all the witnesses. This isn't charity or surrender, it's mutual benefit. You get guaranteed rights and representation. We get stability and the chance to build something without constant violence. Both sides win if we can make it work. Ethan watched Kael's face, saw the war playing out behind those dark eyes. Trust versus cynicism, hope versus experience. The weight of all those graves beneath the canyon floor versus the possibility that his daughter might live to old age without burying her own children. I will agree, Kael said finally, on 3 conditions. First, the mail riders Ethan proposed. They will cross our lands unmolested, as proof that we can honor commitments. Second, any soldier who kills an Apache without cause will face the same justice as an Apache who kills a settler without cause. No double standards. And third, he looked at Ethan. This man serves on the council as one of the settler representatives. He's proven he can see both sides. Bradford nodded slowly. Agreed. Mr. Rourke, are you willing? Ethan thought about gold claims and quiet prospecting, about the simple life he'd tried to build after walking away from all this. Then he looked at Ayla, at the hope fighting with fear in her expression, and knew he couldn't walk away again. I'm willing, he said. The agreement was formalized quickly, both sides too exhausted for lengthy negotiations, too aware that this fragile chance could shatter if they waited. Papers were drawn up on the spot, signatures gathered from all parties, witnesses from both groups signing their names or making their marks. As the sun began its descent toward evening, the crowd slowly dispersed. Settlers rode back to their homes, still suspicious but willing to see if this peace might actually hold. Apache families returned to what remained of their camp, carrying the slight weight of hope alongside their grief. Ethan found himself standing with Ayla at the canyon's edge, watching the sun paint the red stone gold and amber. Do you think it will work? She asked quietly. Honestly, I don't know. There are people on both sides who will resist, who will see any compromise as betrayal. And even with the best intentions, there will be incidents, mistakes, things that could spiral out of control. That's not very reassuring. But, he continued, I think it has a chance, a real one. Bradford seems genuine, Kael's committed, and enough people on both sides are tired of burying loved ones. Maybe that's enough. She was quiet for a moment. Dakota died saying you were a fool for believing peace was possible, that white men would always choose conquest over coexistence. What do you think? I think, she paused, choosing words carefully, I think most people, given the choice between war and peace, will choose peace if they believe peace is actually achievable. The problem has always been that belief. Too many betrayals, too many lies, too much blood in the water. And now? Now I think maybe we have a chance to prove it's achievable. Not easy, not quick, but possible. She looked at him, and he saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. My mother died believing that. I'd like to honor her memory by actually making it happen. Ethan reached out, took her hand. She didn't pull away. They stood together as darkness gathered, 2 people from opposite sides of an ancient divide, holding on to each other in the fragile hope that maybe this time, peace could be more than just a word politicians use to delay inevitable violence. The weeks that followed tested that hope repeatedly. A young Apache warrior, drunk on stolen whiskey, fired shots into the air near a settler farm, sending the family fleeing in terror. The council convened immediately. Kael personally delivered the warrior to face settler justice, his message clear: The peace would be honored even when it hurt. 2 weeks later, a settler's son shot an Apache boy for stealing a chicken. The outrage from both sides was immediate and volcanic. But instead of raids and reprisals, the council met. The shooter was arrested, tried, and sentenced to 5 years at the territorial prison. It wasn't enough for those who wanted blood, but it was justice, administered fairly for the first time anyone could remember. The mail riders began their routes, young men chosen from both communities, carrying letters and packages across what had been killing ground. The first few rode with hearts pounding, expecting ambush at every turn. But the attacks never came. Slowly, impossibly, the routes became routine. Trade followed. Apache hunters bringing game to town markets, settler merchants selling tools and fabric at fair prices. Money changed hands where bullets had flown. Children from both groups, curious and fearless in the way of the young, began playing together at the boundary between territories, inventing games that required no common language. It wasn't paradise. Incidents still happened. Arguments erupted. Old hatreds died hard, and there were people on both sides who actively worked to sabotage the peace. But the council held. Bradford proved to be a man of his word, enforcing agreements even when it was politically costly. Kyle maintained discipline among his people with the same iron will that had kept them alive through years of war. And Ethan found himself serving as bridge between worlds, translating not just words but intentions, helping each side understand the other's perspective even when understanding came hard. 6 months after the canyon meeting, Ethan stood on the porch of Miller's ranch, watching the sunset and marveling at how much had changed. The mail riders had grown into a regular postal service. 3 new trading posts had opened on the border between territories. 2 mixed marriages had occurred. Apache and settler unions that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Ayla rode up as darkness gathered, her horse picking its way carefully across the rough ground. She'd become a regular visitor to the ranch, often staying for dinner, her presence no longer causing the tension it once had. "The council wants to expand the protected hunting grounds," she said, dismounting. "My father's asking if you'll help negotiate the boundaries." "Always more work," Ethan said, but he was smiling. "Did you think peace would be easier than war?" "Honestly, yes. Shows how naive I was." She joined him on the porch, and they sat together in the gathering darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Another answered, the desert coming alive with its nightly symphony. "I have something to tell you," Ayla said, her voice carrying a weight that made Ethan turn to look at her. "My father is stepping down as chief. He says he's too old, too tired, has fought too many wars. He wants younger leadership for this new era. Who will replace him? The Council of Elders is divided. Some want Tala. He's young but wise, and his willingness to work with whites is seen as valuable now instead of treasonous. Others want—" She paused. "Me." Ethan felt something shift in his chest. "What do you want?" "I want to finish what my mother started, what you and my father and so many others have died trying to build. I want my people to thrive, not just survive, and I think maybe I can help make that happen. You'd be an incredible chief." "There's a complication, though." She looked at him, and even in the darkness, he could see the vulnerability in her expression. "If I accept, I'll be bound to my people. All my time, all my energy goes into leading them through this transition. There won't be room for—" She gestured between them, at the connection that had grown from mutual respect into something deeper, something neither of them had fully acknowledged yet. Ethan understood what she was saying, understood the choice she was facing, duty or personal happiness, leadership or love. It was the kind of choice that defined lives and carved paths into stone. "Then we'll find a way to make it work," he said. "I didn't survive war, betrayal, and Colonel Vance just to lose you to politics. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is." He took her hand, felt the calluses and strength there, the hands that could gentle a horse or draw a bow or sign treaties that changed history. "We've built peace between our peoples. Building a life together should be simple by comparison." She laughed, and the sound carried across the desert like music. "You really are a fool. So you keep telling me." They sat together as the stars emerged, 2 people who'd started as enemies and become something far more important, partners in an impossible dream that somehow, against all odds, was becoming reality. 3 years later, Ethan stood in the same burial canyon where everything had changed, but the occasion was different. No tension, no weapons drawn, no threats of violence. Instead, both Apache and settlers gathered for a ceremony that would have been unthinkable when he'd first saved Tala's life in the desert. Ayla, now officially recognized as chief by both her people and the territorial government, was dedicating a monument to the fallen on both sides. A simple stone pillar inscribed with names, Apache and settler alike, all those who'd died in the years of violence, all those whose sacrifice had purchased this fragile peace. As she spoke, her words carrying across the canyon in both Apache and English, Ethan thought about everything it had taken to reach this moment. The blood spilled, the trust built, and broken and rebuilt. The slow, grinding work of turning enemies into neighbors, and neighbors into something approaching friends. Governor Bradford stood beside him, older now, his hair gone silver with stress and long nights negotiating disputes. But his eyes showed satisfaction with what they'd accomplished. "You know," Bradford said quietly, "when I first came to this territory, I thought peace was impossible. Thought I'd spend my tenure managing endless war. What changed your mind?" "You did. You and Kyle, and everyone who chose to believe peace was possible, even when all evidence suggested otherwise." He paused. "History will probably forget most of what happened here, but the people living it, they'll remember. They'll tell their children about the time when enemies put down their weapons and actually tried to understand each other." Ayla finished her speech and began reading names, Apache names mixed with settler names, an endless litany of the dead that took nearly an hour to complete. Ethan heard Neshoba's name and Takota's and Colonel Vance's. The colonel had died in prison 6 months into his sentence, a bitter man who never accepted that peace was preferable to the war he'd wanted. When the last name was read, silence fell over the canyon. Then, as if by unspoken agreement, people from both groups began placing flowers at the monument's base. Apache women and settler women standing side by side, children playing around their feet, men who'd once shot at each other now sharing quiet conversations about weather and crops and the ordinary concerns of life. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems, disputes over water rights, arguments about trade terms, occasional flare-ups of old hatred. But they had mechanisms now for dealing with those problems. Talking instead of killing, negotiating instead of raiding, building instead of destroying. As the ceremony ended and people began dispersing, Tala approached Ethan. The boy, now a young man of 19, had become one of the most effective members of the Joint Council, his ability to see both perspectives making him invaluable. "The mail riders are expanding routes again," Tala said. "They want to connect to Santa Fe, create a real postal network. Your name came up as someone who could scout the safest paths." Ethan smiled. From disgraced scout to postal route planner. Not sure if that's a promotion or demotion. "It's building something that lasts. That's better than either." Tala glanced toward where Ayla was speaking with elders from both groups. "She's good at this, you know. Better than my uncle was in some ways, more willing to bend when bending makes sense. She learned from the best. We all did." Tala's expression grew serious. "I never thanked you properly. For saving my life that day. For everything that came after. I was bleeding out in the desert thinking I'd die alone. And instead I got to help build peace. Not many people get that kind of second chance. You earned it. All of you did. You, Ayla, Kale, Miller, everyone who chose the hard path when the easy one was right there." As the sun began its descent, Ethan and Ayla walked together through the canyon, leaving the monument and the gathered people behind. They'd carved out time for these moments, stolen hours away from the endless demands of leadership and negotiation. "Do you ever regret it?" Ayla asked. "Giving up the simple life you wanted for this complicated one?" Ethan thought about his answer carefully, about the gold claims abandoned, the quiet solitude traded for constant negotiation, the easy path rejected in favor of one littered with challenges and complications. "No," he said finally. "I spent 2 years trying to run from this, and all I found was emptiness. This," he gestured at the canyon, at the monument, at everything they'd built. "This matters." It's hard and frustrating, and sometimes it feels impossible, but it matters. Even when we argue about water rights for 3 hours? Especially then. Because we're arguing instead of killing. Because we found a way to make disagreement something other than fatal. She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They stood together as darkness gathered, two people from different worlds who'd built a bridge and found themselves on it together. My mother would have liked you, Ayla said softly. Would have said you proved her theory that fear, not hatred, drives most violence, and that courage can overcome fear if enough people choose it. I wish I could have met her. You carry her legacy every time you walk into that council chamber and fight for peace. That's enough. The years continued to pass, each one building on the last. The territory that had been synonymous with violence became known for something else. Proof that even ancient enemies could find common ground if they wanted it badly enough. The Joint Council became a model studied by other territories facing similar conflicts. Bradford leveraged their success into a political career that eventually took him to Washington, where he advocated for policies that treated indigenous peoples as partners rather than obstacles. Cale lived another 8 years, long enough to see his people not just survive but begin to thrive. When he died, both Apache and settlers attended his funeral, and the monument in the canyon gained another name carved in stone. Ethan and Ayla never married in the traditional sense. The political complications were too complex, the resistance from purists on both sides too strong. But they built a life together anyway, a partnership that transcended culture and category. Their house sat on the boundary between territories, literally and figuratively, a place where both groups were welcome and both traditions honored. 20 years after Ethan had found Tala bleeding in the desert, he stood on that same spot, now marked with a plaque commemorating where peace had begun. Tala stood beside him, now chief of the Apache, after Ayla had stepped down to focus on education, building schools that taught both Apache and settler children together. Strange to think it all started here, Tala said, looking at the rocks where he'd nearly died. One decision to save a life instead of take one. You made it easy. You could have shot me when I approached, called out for your warriors, done a dozen things that would have ended differently. Instead, you trusted me. Trust is terrifying, Tala agreed, but it's also the only thing that actually builds anything lasting. Fear builds walls. Trust builds bridges. They stood together in the desert heat, two men who'd started as enemies and become brothers in everything but blood, watching the mail riders cross the horizon, young people of both cultures, carrying messages and packages, and proof that different worlds could coexist. As Ethan rode back toward the house, he shared with Ayla, he passed through land that had been transformed. Apache children played with settler children at a shared school. Traders from both cultures haggled good-naturedly at markets. Families visited each other across the old boundaries, sharing meals and stories, and the slowly dissolving conviction that the other side was fundamentally different. It wasn't paradise. There were still problems, still people who resisted, still occasional incidents that tested the peace. But the foundation held, reinforced by 2 decades of choosing negotiation over violence, understanding over hatred, the hard work of peace over the easy answer of war. Ayla was waiting on the porch when he arrived, her hair now threaded with silver, but her eyes still holding that same fierce intelligence that had first captivated him. The council approved the new treaty, she said. Expanded hunting grounds, better water rights, an agreement to jointly manage the old fort as a cultural center. It only took 6 months of negotiation. 6 months is fast for treaty work. We're getting better at this. Both sides actually want it to work now, instead of just going through the motions. She moved into his arms, and they stood together watching the sun set over land that had drunk so much blood and was now growing something else, crops and children and the fragile, precious shoots of lasting peace. Do you think we did it? Ayla asked. Actually built something that will last after we're gone? Ethan thought about all the names on that monument in the canyon. Thought about Neshoba and Vance and Takoda. Oh, and all the others who'd chosen violence and died for it. Thought about the children playing together in the school, growing up in a world where the other side wasn't automatically the enemy. I think we gave it a real chance, he said. Built the foundation strong enough that the next generation can build on it. Whether they choose to is up to them, but at least now they have the choice. That's more than we had. As darkness fell over the desert, lights began appearing in windows on both sides of the old boundary, Apache fires and settler lamps, creating a constellation of light that stretched across what had been killing ground and was now simply home. Somewhere in the distance, a mail rider called out a greeting in both languages, his voice carrying across the night. Someone called back, laughter in their tone. The ordinary sounds of peace, so common they were easy to overlook, so precious they were worth every drop of blood and sweat and tears it had taken to achieve them. Ethan pulled Ayla closer, feeling the weight of all those years, all those battles fought with words instead of weapons, all those moments when peace had hung by a thread and somehow, impossibly, held. "We did good," he said quietly. "We did what was necessary," she corrected. "Good is what comes after, what the next generation builds on what we started." And in the houses scattered across the territory, children were falling asleep to stories not of war and hatred, but of the time when enemies put down their weapons and chose a different path. Stories that would shape how they saw the world, how they treated those different from themselves, how they chose to resolve conflicts when their own time came to lead. The peace would be tested. It would face challenges neither Ethan nor Ayla could predict. But it would endure, built on the foundation they'd laid with courage and sacrifice and the simple revolutionary belief that different peoples could share the same land if they wanted it badly enough. As Ethan looked out over the desert one last time before heading inside, he thought about that day in the canyon, that first impossible step toward peace. How everyone had thought it would fail, how all the smart money bet on war. How a few stubborn people had refused to accept that violence was inevitable and had fought like hell for another way. They'd lost people along the way. Ayla's mother, the warriors who'd fallen in ambushes, the settlers killed in raids before peace took hold. All those names carved in stone, the price paid for this fragile accomplishment. But they'd won something too. Not just territory or resources or victory in the traditional sense. They'd won the right to imagine a different future, to build something that honored the dead by ensuring their children wouldn't have to die the same way. And in the end, Ethan thought, as he closed the door on another day of hard-won peace, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.